Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, Chicago media personality, John St. Augustine.
Glad to be with you today on WCPT for Joan. I get a big kick out of hearing that little buzz read there. Media personality in Chicago. I work really hard to get to that spot. And glad to be sitting in for Joan today. She'll be back next week. We got a whole full 3 hours ahead of us, of course. Cannot start with anything except the passing of the great Jimmy Carter, our 39th president. I was thinking about him today. That was the first election that I ever voted in. And coming out of Watergate, some of you of a certain vintage will remember what that's all about. That's when Richard Nixon resigned for lying. I'm going to leave that right there. And, of course, Gerald Ford came in and then pardoned Nixon. And I think that there was this whole thing. If you put Watergate on top of what was going on in Vietnam, it was a very stacked deck back then. You got working backwards Watergate. You got Vietnam ending around 1974, 75. Watergate was in 73. And if you look at the 60s decade, it was a you-know-what show that I can't say on the radio. Otherwise, I would. So there's a lot going on at that time. And I remember the first time that I saw or heard about Jimmy Carter was this guy who said he was a peanut farmer. And I thought, what? And for some reason, it just resonated with me that maybe, and I was young, I was just going into college at that time, maybe this is a good idea. Maybe we need to get out of the other stuff where these guys are causing a lot of problems and find our way into this new realm that he was talking about. And I just found his aw shucks, down home, I grow peanuts stuff, just very refreshing. And it worked for him back then in 1977. He defeated Gerald Ford, went in to become the president till 1980, going to when Reagan took over. And 81 was the official year that he took over. But my point in this is those 48 months that he had, I think, are so overlooked. Because usually here's what happens when you mention Jimmy Carter, and of course now in the past tense, you say, oh, he's an incredible humanitarian, but not a very good president. I kind of disagree with that. I think it takes time. Of course, he had 100 years for us to look at his life, but it takes time for the ripple effect to work itself out when you talk about somebody being in public office. And I'm a huge history buff. I think there's a lot to learn from history. I don't think we studied enough. Otherwise, we wouldn't repeat this stuff as much as we do. But, this is a guy who really came from nothing. Until he was 11, they didn't have any electricity in their house or running water. So how do you take that way of growing up and apply it to seeing other people in the world? And I think that was the genesis or the gestation of how Jimmy Carter saw everything. Poor people who just didn't need a handout. They needed a hand up. And I think that was such a deep thing in him that it really was the rudder that determined the route that he took so much in his life. And when he went into the Navy, this was a big deal. He was a submariner. This is nothing to mess with. So I'm a Coast Guard veteran, and all the services, we bust on each other all the time, but nobody really busts on the submarine guys because they are a different breed. But he did that and became a lieutenant and highly decorated and recognized, chosen by Admiral Hyman Rickover for the nuclear submarine program. And this was one smart dude. Talk about nuclear reactors and technology, and senior officer of the pre-commissioning of the Seawolf, which is the second nuclear sub. And of course, you go on from there when he met Miss Roslyn and the whole thing, and how they emerged really out of Plains, Georgia. These two very simple, dedicated, faith-filled people that took the national spotlight. And then, of course, you got his brother Billy. If you remember Billy Beer, that was a thing. And I remember, reading articles and interviews with the president. What do you think of your brother? He's like, well, I really can't control him. So he had his own beer out there. And of course, Miss Lillian, President Carter's mom, was a big, big influence. So all of these things are vivid in my mind as I'm thinking about him today, as he just passed at the age of 100 yesterday. But the thing that stands out most to me, and doing the work that I've done over the years, you may hear me when I fill in for Joan in the past, but I know you may have heard in this station, if you've listened for any amount of time, is the Earth Matters series with Bill Curtis. And so Bill and I developed that series. It's 10 years ago now, and it played in syndication, still does in some places. We did well over 300 episodes, and they all originated right here on WCPT. And there's a reason for that, because number one is this audience that CPT has to me is very progressive in their thought processes. So if we're introducing concepts with the environment or science facts or whatever, you're going to get it. We're talking a very smart group of people here. So that piece there has been a mainstay of all the work that I do in the media, which is the environmental stuff. And when you look at Jimmy Carter, and listen, I'm a Theodore Roosevelt guy every day of the week and twice on Sunday. He is right next, in my opinion, right next to TR when it comes to the environmental legacy that he has. I will never forget when he put solar panels on the White House. I mean, how can you not? This was a guy who was so far ahead of his time. He was doing this stuff in Georgia before he ever got to Washington. It was all about sustainability. And back then, nobody used that word. Most people couldn't even spell it. So you put environmental sustainability together and you have something where we're at now, trying to find our way through these things. Carter did this decades ago. And so he was always in front of a lot of this stuff. So whether it was the solar power type of things or he was working on the Alaska Lands Act, which was huge. I think it added like over 1 million acres to Alaska in perpetuity. So you keep your hands off it. We don't need to drill everywhere. There are places that need to stay the way that they are. And that's really, really important. So that was a big piece of it. Coincidentally, John Denver, a longtime friend of mine, the late singer-songwriter, helped President Carter develop that lands bill. He went to Congress and actually sang a couple songs to convince the congressman to sign it. It worked. They must have been fans. So there was that piece. The solar panels, the other piece. But this other part about Superfund cleanups. Richard Nixon is the guy that rolled out the EPA, and he did not do it because he was an environmentalist. He did it because it was important at the time to get votes. So if you can roll back with me to 1969 going into 70, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio literally caught fire. And no one had ever seen anything like this. Now it's like CGI. But back then, literally, there was so much garbage in the river. It's spontaneous combustion, and it went up. It was on the news all over the world. It's an embarrassment, quite frankly, at the time. And so out of that came calls for people to do something. That's where Earth Day started. And so out of that, Nixon's advisor said, here's a good idea to get votes, be an environmental guy. So he created the EPA out of that. So again, make no mistake, Tricky Dick was not an environmentalist, but he was a smart politician. So he created the EPA out of that, and that's where a lot of this stuff comes. But the Superfund cleanup was something that had been lacking, and they had to figure out how to do something with it because there were so many sites that were contaminated in our country and the land that we all live on, that they had to get about doing this. And for many years, I lived in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where I started my radio career. And I remember when the EPA came up to clean up a Superfund site that had been something to do with creosote before that. There was a company there, and all the creosote they just dumped into the ground. And that is one of the great Achilles heels, I think, for humanity, is we don't see things as sacred until we lose them. And even then we have a hard time with it. So I remember talking to the EPA guy up there. What's the deal? Well, there's so much creosote in the ground, they literally had to excavate a mile around where the business used to be to get to clean dirt. So my arguments or discussions with people about global warming and climate change are long gone as far as trying to convince anybody. I spend my days now working on projects that forward that stuff, that find ways for alternative energy and things that we can do better. Because as a species, we can't get out of our own way in many ways. So that's what I kind of see as Carter's legacy. And every time I think about the Alaska Land Acts bill being passed and those acreages being added that cannot be touched by any future permission given by any president or anybody, that's important stuff. And I think that's what happens. It's like when you plant a tree, you probably won't live long enough to see it grow, but you still plant them anyway. At least I would. Anyway, I got a full day for you coming up in about 15 minutes. I'm running right down the street here, not physically, but just kind of philosophically, to Schurz High School, where I'm an alumni. And I'm going to be having on Dr. Heidy Moran, who's the principal of Schurz. I want to talk about what's going on with CPS these days, not the stuff you see on the news. We're going to get behind the desk with the principal and talk about all that. And then coming up at 3 o'clock, we're going to talk about AI and what's going on with the onslaught of artificial intelligence. I think we got enough trouble with our own intelligence. Adding that to it could be bad, but we'll find out. And Kristy will be joining me. Also going to be talking to Julie Murphy. We have a new year coming up in just mere hours. If you're going to set one resolution, it might be the way that you look at your finances. And so she is all about the emotion behind money. She's a best-selling author. She teaches this stuff, and it's fascinating how our money habits are connected to our emotions. My gal pal, Jennifer Weigel, seems like can't show up at WCPT unless she walks in the door. She's going to stop by at 4 o'clock. And then at the end of the day, before we let you go off to Patty Vasquez, who gets in here at 5 o'clock, we're going to have the gentleman who is the director of the Climate Action Museum here in Chicago, Doug Farr, and it's the only one of its kind in the country. Climate Action Museum right here in Chicago. If you didn't know about it, you will. Anyway, we're going to run this Earth Matters on the way out the door. I want you to kind of set up the rest of this. So by the time we get to Doug at 4:30, you'll have a little bit of a taste of Earth Matters.
Does all our activity living on Earth contribute to global warming? The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been leading the effort to determine what impact, if any, humans have on global climate change. The report issued in Stockholm indicates that human activity, the amount of waste, carbon, depletion of natural resources, and all the other ways we create greenhouse gas emissions, is 95% the result of the increase in population from 2.5 billion in 1950 to the 7.1 billion we have today. It's projected that by the year 2050, upwards of 10 billion humans will inhabit Earth. Can humanity sustain itself under the weight of so many people? As they say, only time will tell. I'm Bill Curtis, and Earth Matters.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, Chicago media personality, John St. Augustine.
You have no much how much fun that is to my ego to hear. This is media personality guy. I get to have another 2.5 hours of that stuff. Speaking of Patty, tonight on Driving It Home, she'll be joined by Chicago Community Acupuncture Clinic Director Dr. Jason Bussell and his daughter Ava. And actually, they're going to put editorial cartoonist Scott Stantis on the air. This is going to be really interesting. I have a picture in my office at home that Scott Stantis signed to me a decade ago or more. And it was a time when there was so much rain in Chicago. He drew this cartoon of the creature of the Black Lagoon coming out of a sewer in Chicago. I saw it in the paper, and I knew Scott from back in the day, and he actually signed a colored version of that. I have it on my wall in a frame, so don't miss Scott this afternoon. Patty will have a $25 gift card for Fry the Coop to give away, and Driving It Home weekdays from 5 to 7 right here on WCPT 820. I mentioned before about the environmental legacy of President Carter, and I just wanted to kind of squeeze this in here before we talk with Dr. Moran at the bottom of the hour about how important things can turn out when you get unison, people moving in a direction where it's for the greater good. I use this example whenever I go out and do talks, especially the Earth Matter stuff. And by the way, that was, of course, Mr. Bill Curtis's voice you heard a few minutes ago talking about the climate change thing and are humans responsible? And I think that is the biggest hook, is it not? People get all stuck on whether or not we're responsible. What if we're just 1% responsible? Shouldn't we just be responsible in general? That's my thought. I always use the example of the Montreal Protocol. And the Montreal Protocol, for those of you who do not know, was an international treaty designed to protect the ozone layer. We've all heard about it, class, so pay attention. It was agreed to on the 16th of September in 87 and entered into force in January of 1989. So scientists had found out that the CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, are depleting the ozone layer. And those were propellants in refrigerants like air conditionings and refrigerators and even aerosol spray cans. And when they developed the CFCs in the 30s and 40s, nobody wondered what was going to happen if we just keep jettisoning this stuff out into the atmosphere. And I think that is like the paramount piece of everything to do with the environment. The back end stuff is not even taken into consideration. What we can do on the front end, how does it fix the problem, and how much money can we make on it? So all these things connected make it very difficult for people to get off their stuff and see the long-term vision for whatever it might be. However, these scientists had found out that this chlorofluorocarbon gas was basically playing Pac-Man with the ozone layer. It's chomp, 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 eating it away, eating it away, eating it away. Once they figured out what it was, they went to all the nations of the world, said, listen, you got to stop with the CFCs. It's literally eating away the ozone layer. And if there was one piece of the puzzle that really allows us to have life on Earth, it's the ozone, which is like the sunscreen of the planet. It protects us from the ultraviolet rays of the sun. And then just a little side note from the sun thing, the sunlight that hits, which is a beautiful day here in Chicago, by the way, the sunlight that hits the Earth has been brewing from the inside of the sun, the very molten center of the sun, for about 82 million years. By the time it gets to the surface and gets to Earth, it only takes 8 minutes. But really, it took 82 million years. Matter of fact, you heard Tom Hartman a little bit earlier. I've been on radio so long that Tom Hartman used to be a guest of mine, so I'm going back a ways. And he wrote a book called The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, where Tom talks about how this star allows life to thrive right here on this planet. Everything is exactly in the order it needs to be. If we get out of line, you know what hits the fan. And a lot of times we don't have a paddle. So the ozone thing's going on, and this hole was opening and closing. And so they said, listen, we got to stop this. And everybody started jumping on board, except, of course, for the people who, mass-produce CFCs and chlorofluorocarbons and all the kind of chemical companies and stuff like that. And they had gotten down to a point where there's only a few holdouts left. And one of the holdouts was the United States of America. The president at the time was Ronald Reagan. Same guy that took the solar panels off the top of the White House that Jimmy Carter had put up. We don't need that stuff. We just need to stay with what works, and that's how it's going to go. So this went on and on and on, and the pressure for Reagan to sign this Montreal Protocol was mighty. Everybody's jumping on board. His guys, I can't remember the name, the interior guy was James Watt. Go look him up. He's a real piece of work. So anyway, it came down to Maggie Thatcher, of all people, the Iron Lady, who was a trained chemist, coming to the United States, getting a private audience with Ronald Reagan and saying, look, Ronnie, here's the deal. If we don't do something about this ozone hole, the incidences of skin cancer are going to skyrocket over time, and you're going to be known as the president who allowed that. Great move on her part. Two reasons. Number one is Ronnie was all about the legacy, I suppose, as most presidents are. But the second part was Reagan had had a couple of bouts of skin cancer right on his schnoz. And that hit home. And when it comes to any, in my opinion, my observation, definitely my experience, when it comes to any problem we're facing, whether it's political, social, it doesn't matter what it is, it's always somebody else's problem until it's your problem. Then why isn't somebody doing anything about this? So it was Reagan was like, what? Why do we care? We got manufacturers here making money. We can't be knocking these guys out of business. Oh, you mean more people might have skin cancer like I had it? That kind of scared him a little bit into a different direction. Once he wrapped it up and said, yes, we're going to do it, really kudos to Maggie Thatcher for pulling that off. Everybody else fell in line. The ozone treaty was ratified by 198 parties, 197 states in the EU. It was the first universally ratified treaty in United States history. Everybody except, I think, Russia and maybe China got on board. And it has been really remarkable in the policymaking process at the global scale because it was only 14 years between a basic scientific research discovery of what was going on in 1973 and the international agreement signed in 1985 and 87, just less than 20 years. I'm going to wager you couldn't get that done today. And you know why? My opinion is because the things that seem to be common sense for us, like, hey, here's some scientific evidence that this is causing a problem and we need to get off that, that's just dismissed as something that's not true. And that's all it takes anymore. Science kind of just gets pushed to the side. The interesting thing, of course, is all those chlorofluorocarbon, let me spit that again twice, chlorofluorocarbons. You try and say it at home. Go ahead. That's what I thought. Paul can't do it. He's sitting right here. He's trying to do it. Chlorofluorocarbons. All those manufacturers found some other propellant to use. We still have refrigerators. We still have air conditioning. We're just not eating the ozone up. So my point in all this is look how far I would like to say we've come since that happened in 87, but look really how we've regressed on these things. Had President Carter stayed in office, whether you think he was a good president or not a good president, is neither here nor there. He was in office from 1977 to 81. Reagan took over. Had he had another term, 8 years, I believe that you would have seen the environmental awareness that we're looking for now and trying to chop away at now would have already been in place. He would have seen to that. And things that we're trying to push into now would have already been somewhat standard. I will never forget and remembering when 2016, when Hillary Clinton was running for president, she was down in Kentucky, and they were going around to all the coal mines. And of course, Trump said, "We're putting all the coal miners back to work." That's not a good impression, but you know what I'm saying. We're going to put all the coal miners back to work. Well, that never happened, number one. Number two, the Coal Mining Museum in Kentucky, the National Coal Mining Museum in Kentucky, is solar powered. Check it out. So I'm thinking to myself, if I'm Hillary Clinton, I'm going, yeah, the mines aren't going to open again, but we can build solar panels here and pay the same amount of money. But that's just, I guess a little too late on that deal. Coming up in a few minutes, I'm going to be talking with Dr. Heidy Moran, the Schurz principal, current Schurz principal, about some of the challenges from behind her desk that we never hear about in the news because we're only talking for 15 or 20 seconds in sound bites and everybody's arguing CTU, CPS. We're going to push back on all that stuff. We're going to kind of get down to the nitty gritty and see what's going on. And from her perspective, and in full disclosure, I'm an alumni of Schurz. Every time I get a chance to be on the radio, I talk about this school. It was really important in my background and who I developed as a person and all those pieces. I'm very active with the alumni. So this is a 2-foot putt for me. I'm just giving you a heads up. But I'm still going to ask her the tough questions because they need to be answered from her perspective, from behind that desk, not from a news conference somewhere with a bunch of cameras behind it. So anyway, she'll be coming up in just a couple minutes. Until then, we'll take a short time out, take care of the people that take care of us. Back with more right here on WCPT.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, Chicago media personality, John St. Augustine.
That is correct. I am filling in for Joan today. Looking forward to that. Tomorrow, this slot, Turi Ryder will be in for Joan, and her guests are Dr. Tariq Hamed of the Arva Institute for Environmental Studies, which is going to be a great show. Illinois State Treasurer Michael Frex. Chuck Hildebrandt, the retired digital marketing executive and library scofflaw, who's using a 50-year-old overdue library book to raise money to benefit Reading is Fundamental, which is a great nonprofit, RIF. Carol Sharp is the president and CEO of the Night Ministry. Ryan Martin, owner of the Den Comedy Club and Theater in Wicker Park. And political comedy actor-director Whitney White, who is returning to Chicago to direct something going on at Shakespeare Theater here on the 14th. As soon as I can figure it out, I'll let you know. But I'm already in my ear hearing about Dr. Moran, but that's on tomorrow with Turi. So, Dr. Moran, welcome to WCPT.
Great. So great to be on with you, John.
So I'm going to let you tell your story first, but I just got to say this is from your bio, and I think this says to me the reason that you're so effective at Schurz and where you come from as far as a perspective with the kids. The first time you stepped foot in a K-12 school, you were an undocumented immigrant learning English as a second language.
I was, John. I was a CPS kid and went to school in the Humboldt Park neighborhood. And I just learned so much from my teachers in my local neighborhood community school, and ended up going K to 12, actually. And even after I graduated from CPS schools, I kept going back. I kept going back to tutor with my 7th grade teacher, who was such a great mentor to me, and one of the reasons I'm still in this country, actually, went above and beyond. And even now, I am just so committed to our public schools. We have phenomenal teachers, but we just have some phenomenal students and just so much talent that is in our public schools.
So I remember that you taught in Cambodia for a while. I mean, you've actually been around the world, and some of the challenges in education are not just localized, but they're worldwide. And then you set your sights on Schurz. You were there for 4 years as an assistant principal. You took over the job just a couple of years ago, I think it's been now, right?
Yeah, that's right. I was so lucky to have worked in public schools in the city, in the Chicagoland area, in our city limits, but then also got extended some opportunities to do professional development and collaborate with one of our sister schools in Cambodia. And so through that exchange, learned so many things. Learned that some of the challenges that our kiddos face, whether they're on the south side of Chicago where I started my career, or whether they're in war-ravaged Cambodia, it's all the same, and kiddos are all the same, and and the teacher's job is also equally challenging because your job is really to instill some great values into our kiddos and really mold them to be some amazing contributors to our world and society.
So for most people in Chicago listening to this show, whether you have kids in the CPS system or not, most of what we hear comes on the news these days. Seems like every 2 to 4 years it kind of goes through the same emaciations with the CPS and the CTU and back and forth. And in the middle of all that chaos, you still have a high school to run.
Yeah, we do. So we're at Schurz, and our kiddos are always right. You always hear the media say, "Oh, these are unprecedented times." I think every generation has their own set of unprecedented events, but we're there day in and day out to offer an amazing educational experience for students, for teenagers who really just want to make their mark on the world. And above all else, every kiddo wants to make a positive impact, and our teachers are there to, no matter what that noise is, on the in the world around us, whether it's this pandemic or what's going on with the news of crime and the economy and all this, additional just constant barrage of bad news that we always seem to hear. Our kids are there. They're there to have to learn from each other, to make friends, to make lifelong friendships, and with their classmates, with their teachers, and to really contribute to this amazing community. And our teachers and the rest of our staff who are there, that you know very well, are just there to do the best that we can with what we've got.
So probably 10 years ago, when we really started working as an alumni to get underneath what Schurz was doing, we talked to the former principal, Dr. Rodriguez, and 3 or 4 of us went in and said, listen, we're starting to do some things here. We want to support the school in some way, because I'm all about, if you're going to complain about issues, then you don't have time to do anything about it. Maybe you should do something about it, then you wouldn't have time to complain about it. But anyway, just a common sense thing I learned at Schurz, Doc. Just what can I tell you? So, yeah. So, but he said, what we really need help with is the STLS kids. These are students in temporary living situations. And back then, I had never heard of such a thing. When I went to school there, they may have been kids who were displaced or homeless, as we called them back then. But if they were, we didn't know about it. Very few. And come to find out, over the years we've been supporting Schurz in this program, is that this is a citywide thing. It's probably a nationwide thing, but we're keeping it local as Chicago, that there is a budget for this, that it's figured into things, that there are these kids who, for whatever reason and circumstance, are not living in a traditional a home unit. And we were just stunned, quite frankly, to find that out. I mean, high school is tough enough as it is. Imagine not having the things that you normally would have to succeed at that. So we've carried that along almost 10 years now, supporting that program. And just recently, I know that Lucille and the ladies up front, they took a lot of these kids shopping, and I was just stunned to hear when I was in a couple weeks ago that the quote of the day was that there was a young lady who had never had new clothes in her life in high school, and that all she needed to do was go shopping with her mother for food, and everything was a hand down or at Goodwill, and she was just over the top for 2 reasons. One is she had new clothes and new underwear, a foreign object to her, and the second thing is she couldn't understand or grasp how a bunch of old alumni would raise money and just have her buy clothes. But it is a different format and landscape these days as it was when I went there. So what are some of the inherent challenges, not only in that program, but some of the other things you have to deal with that, for the most part, people listening to the show have never had to deal with, Doc?
Oh my gosh, that's it's so true, right? We've got new challenges now. Obviously, we've got newcomers who have been coming to Schurz, but since I started there, even before pandemic, you're really dealing. Our neighborhood schools, Schurz is one of them, is really dealing with the effects of living in an economy where there's a lot of challenges. And, us being a neighborhood school, we admit we accept everyone who moves in within our school boundaries. And that means we've got kiddos who are there on their own, right, who are orphans for one reason or another, who are perhaps living and being raised with a grandmother or grandparent, and have come under really, really tough and challenging circumstances despite having, lived for generations in the city. They come to school because that's their respite. That's where they're cared for. You mentioned, Miss Thompson, Miss office, all administrators who work the main office, and really get to know the students and get to know their unique circumstances. We're blessed to have a program like the SDLS program that helps support those students, and then we're blessed with alumni like you that help to make sure that they have what they need, what their basics are. So I would say that in the last 10, 15 years with this gig economy, one of the major things that we noticed is our kids, they're hardworking. And so they're coming to school, but then they're working. They're working at, a ton of them are working at O'Hare Airport as we speak, actually. And they're working second and third shift, and they're coming to school, and they're trying to make ends meet for themselves and their family. And as you mentioned, that young lady, our clerks go, and they go and take them on a once yearly shopping spree to get some warm clothing. And as they're there, just pick up whatever incidentals. And what do the kids want to do? They want to shop for their families. They want to shop for, right. Oh, you know what? I live with my aunt, but she takes so good care of me. Can I get her something? That's what they're there to do. And I think sometimes the image we have of our youth is that they're absorbed, and all they care about is, the latest gaming system. And that's not true for our kiddos. And, teaching and educating the youth in such an environment is really, really tough. I haven't been full-time in a classroom in a little bit, but we have some very dedicated teachers, and just sitting in there, you just see them work magic, competing with the attention from TikTok and all the other social media platforms. We've got teachers that really spend time to craft out some really engaging lessons and try to hook kids in. And they're doing a phenomenal job. I don't think I mentioned this to you when you stopped by the office a couple weeks ago, but we've got 2 Golden Apple nominated teachers. Wow. I just had to sit and write a couple of recommendations, and we're just so excited because one of them was nominated by a former alumni, and one of them by a colleague. And so hopefully we'll get to hear more from those, but it's just really special when you can work alongside some very dedicated, committed adults who really just want to pour into the next generation.
Well, the great challenge is, I think, for anybody that supports any school, the school you went to, whether it's a grammar school or high school, and we tend to remember it as it was, which is our prerogative. It was very different when I went there. Everybody flocked in from the neighborhood. Either you walk to Schurz High School, or you would, if you're at the other edge, you would go up to Taft, or if you're one of the guys, back when I went to school, Lane Tech was just boys only. So there was somewhat limited, but you had the high schools around Roosevelt and like that. But those days are long gone. The neighborhoods have changed drastically and dramatically, where you once had this kind of landlocked population that was flocking to your doors. I believe that, the attendance or the population of the student population has dropped precipitously over the last few years, which is a great challenge in itself for budgeting and all the rest. But do you see any kind of upward movement back in the direction of more students, or do you think it's going to stay about the same?
It's stayed about the same. I think it's challenging for families to be able to afford and remain living within city limits. So the kids that we've had transfer have moved out of state, and they usually reference it's, our parents got jobs, or our family has jobs, or we've got family over there. And so they're just kind of moving around. And so that's been a challenge. We do, being a neighborhood school, we are a neighborhood school, but we do pull from over 40 some zip codes. So even though we're there, and I think that how many are in the city of Chicago? 70 something. 80. Yeah. We still admit everyone that's within our neighborhood boundaries, but then again, you also have just sort of the way that the city of Chicago kind of shifted how we do our admissions. Students really want to come to Schurz because we have such great offerings for them. We have 5 career technical education trajectories, and we've got a world-class IB program, dual language program, and so we definitely pull from all over the city. We've got kids commuting for up to an hour at a time to really make it to a great place that Schurz is.
So the other thing that is encouraging to me is the tech stuff and the trade stuff you mentioned briefly. So we do I guess it's like a cash award every year in the honor of our late great friend Phil Larson, who was a carpenter. And again, going back to the old days, there was auto shop, print shop, wood shop, metal shop, electric shop. All the shops were there. And over time, technology kind of replaced some of that stuff. It's starting to make a comeback, though, isn't it?
Oh, it definitely is. It definitely is. And then we've been lucky to be blessed with some infusion of additional resources to really revitalize different programs that we've got. We've got an amazing auto shop program. We've got a business entrepreneurship. We've got a health science. And so what's really exciting, John, is that we have on staff now a coordinator to help us do more job-based training opportunities. And the only thing that's missing, or one of the things that she's working on cultivate right now, is those relationships with our local businesses. We've got kiddos ready to leave school half day and then go work in a trade, go work in a doctor's office. We've got a few students that we're working with Athletico and doing training, physical therapy training and shadowing some of those trainers. And so we've got kids doing internships, some of them unpaid, some of them generously paid. And so that's the direction that we're moving into, is really providing a world-class education during the day and then getting kids off in the afternoon to go and actually start to work, experience what it's like working, know if that's the career for you, and then open up, as you mentioned, your generous scholarships, open up doors for students to pursue this beyond high school.
You know, it's so interesting to me because back in the day, walking into the main office meant you're in trouble. And none of us wanted to go to the main office. You've been summoned to the main office. We knew things weren't going to go south at that point. But that's not how it is now. I'm sure you have some of that. So every now and again when I stop in and I'll just sit and watch, these kiddos, as you call them, are coming in and they are connecting with the staff at a level I'd never seen when I was in high school. It is almost like they have a trust factor with all the ladies up front, with you, with the people in the back, across the board. There's this serious trust factor that has developed over time at Schurz, and I just thought that was something that really needed to be pointed out, because I sit on that bench, and I might have asked you, I think it was, or asked Dyra about, you know, how old is some of this stuff here in the main office? I think the mailbox area is literally from 1910, but for the most part, I sit there and watch these kids come in, and they're talking to the ladies behind the counter like it's their mom. Fascinating to me.
They really do. You know, it's so interesting you mentioned that about trust. Schurz is soon going to be featured on a case study with the University of Chicago. I believe it's going to be the only high school. The University of Chicago does this Cultivate survey that CPS adopted in the last couple of years. And in it, we just got our results back for this year, and one of our largest areas of growth and one of the areas they focus on is student voice and student leadership. And that is so essential to how we do things at Schurz, and to be lauded and applauded for cultivating that. You know, they're in there because a lot of our student leaders are running the school. They're doing the announcements. They're running the fundraisers for contributing to our local food pantry. They are organizing themselves. You know, we have a truly representative student council. I don't know how true this is for other high schools, but we literally have every single third grade class has representatives, and we have an executive board. We've got two co-presidents because the juniors and seniors needed to compromise on that. And so they've been just doing a phenomenal job. And so they come in, I get, you know, once a month meeting with them. We've got student leaders that get celebrated every month, and they come in and they meet with me. They give me a grade. How am I doing? How's the school doing?
Really?
But they also give really constructive feedback. And that has made some changes in how we run things at Schurz and has truly made it an inclusive place for all students, but also giving them that voice that, you know, the research says the more voice students have in their school, the more responsive it is to them and the better place it is to learn. So
the one thing that was another big eye-opener for me in the last couple of minutes we have here is that when I went to school, as I mentioned, you know, you went to Schurz, you went to Taft, went late, whatever. You went to the school you're kind of connected to. But that's not the way it is. As you said, you're pulling from 40 different zip codes now. So much of this has become almost like marketing for a high school, is it not? That you're literally, back in the day, our competitions were mostly academic and sports related. Now it's for state dollars and fund dollars and all the rest of it. Depends on population. You really have had to step up, quite frankly, the marketing aspect and the offerings that Schurz has versus fill in the blank school.
Yeah, and I think that's a reality for, I think, many other schools, or I'd say all the schools, right? Yeah. We really want to try to get the word out on what's really happening, all the great things that are happening in every one of our schools. But I have to say I've noticed in my very brief career as principal, I've noticed some shifts. I actually serve on the citywide CPS committee for a new report card for schools. And sitting in this committee has been very eye-opening. Just the same way that we've been increasing our student voice, they've really been increasing the voice of different stakeholders. So I'm in this committee with moms, parents, community members, a couple of other principals, couple teachers, couple students. And so what's shifting is not this ranking of a report card. You know, it used to be your level 1 school, your level 2 school, and everyone's really trying to get higher on that ranking. Mm-hmm. It's really about what we offer for students. And so now this new report card is going to be giving a very comprehensive look at schools. And so what do you offer for kids? What are your student club, extracurricular, sports? Mm-hmm. What are the programs you offer? And so that's really exciting because I think that's where Schurz really does outshine the competition, is that we're a truly inclusive environment. We've got kids and families from all walks of life, a very, very diverse student body, and great offerings for them that sometimes isn't reflected in a standardized report card, because if you're only focusing on numbers, you don't really look at where do you start. So when you think about our freshmen that we get and where they end up as seniors, that's the most remarkable thing about Schurz.
Wasn't there somebody placed at Harvard recently? Do I remember this?
Yeah, all the time. And we've got.
Do you say all the time?
Oh, I mean, we've got phenomenal stories like that all the time. Is what I'm hearing is that we've got not just the students that are placed in the Ivy League, but we also got our kiddo from the auto shop that ends up getting, a contract with BMW and making more than almost as much as I made it my first year as principal.
What a great deal that is. He can fix your car for you, so that'll be good. Yeah. Listen, I just want to say thanks so much. The school became a landmark in 1979 for any of us or any of you out there listening that are Schurz Bulldog. It's a landmark the whole time, and they just made it official. Anybody that's ever been in that school, and all the alumni, we talk about this stuff all the time. There's just something visceral about that building. There's something amazing about the bones of the place. We all feel very much coming home when we go there and do these things and support it. So, I've told you this before. I've told the staff this before. We really think that our school, which is still our school, is in great hands, and we're so much behind your efforts there, everybody, to continue the great legacy of Schurz. So anything you need, of course, you have it, and I just want to take time. I know you're on break. Take a little bit of time to spend with us here on WCPT.
Will do. Thank you so much, John. We couldn't do it without your support.
All right, take care. After this, we're going to come back in about 10 minutes. We'll be talking to Julie Murphy about the emotion behind money. But before that, there's this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, Chicago media personality, John St. Augustine.
We almost had to do that myself. The computer got locked up a little bit. I almost had to do my own. Hey, it's John St. Augustine, media personality here. Anyway, I appreciate you guys doing that. I mentioned earlier about in this slot, Turi Ryder's going to be in for Joan, and I went through her guests. Then after the New Year's Day Best of Joan episode, Turi is going to be back on Thursday, and Eric Zorn, the great writer, will be here on Friday. Joan returns Monday, January 6th, live, local, and progressive weekdays from 2 to 5 Central right here on WCPT. There's a couple of reasons I asked Dr. Moran to come on. Number one is I'm a huge supporter of my school. Bottom line, grow up in this city on the Northwest side, kind of a brick and mortar existence growing up. You walk to school backwards in the snow, the whole drill. I just have this deep connection to this place that gave me so much. And when we started getting, behind it and supporting it as an alumni association, the groundswell was and still is formidable. Thousands of people come out of the woodwork, and they all have these different versions of Schurz depending on when they attended school there. And, I get it. It's like any high school. If you had a really great experience, you want to go back and kind of experience that again. This is a little bit over the top for me. I never expected, once I graduated in none of your business, that I'd ever go back to the place again. And here I am, knee deep in this stuff. Because the older I get, the more I realize how important it was, back then. And so much of the common sense for uncommon times mandate that I try to write about and do on radio and podcasting and all that stuff comes from my 48 months there. When you really think about it, it's a very short amount of time. And the people I met there, I still have friends, obviously, from that time. And you start to see, at least we did, that we need to pay it forward by giving it back. That's kind of the way it works. And I think in any endeavor that's worthwhile, that's what it should be kind of all about. And what I mentioned before, and I do this quite often, whether I'm on my own podcast or happen to sit in here or other places, the world has always been in turmoil. Just crack a history book, go pick a day and a date, and there's something going on. So that's what's happening over there. I've always been a big proponent of I can't control that stuff. I can control how I respond to that stuff. So it would be easy, and there's a lot of this in the media. You know, Weigel's coming in a little bit later, 4 o'clock. I can throw this to her. She's an Emmy Award-winning journalist. She did the news for years, and she got out of it. It was just basically killing her. Bottom line was how that went. And so you imagine how much this negativity plays in your life when you don't even realize it. It's almost like getting radiation when you don't realize you're getting radiation. It's like laying out on the beach without sunblock. Oh, I'm doing okay. And next thing you know, you can't get up because you're fried like a lobster. Too much negativity, too much of the information, news you can't use will scorch you. At least that's my experience, and the people I've worked with and being in this radio business 30 years is brought that about. And so when you keep poking at people and it seems there's nothing they can do about it, it's called PTSD. And I'm pretty sure everybody in the United States at this point on some level has PTSD for, greater or lesser reasons. So the reason I had her on is to talk about what she's doing as a principal there, because if you usually hear about high schools, they're in the news for the wrong things. Not going to do that here because that's only what you hear for an hour a day, and it goes into the wastebasket of Audio Vault. But every day they're in there doing their job. Every high school in this city is doing their job the best they can. So when your only reference to this stuff is the arguments going on at CTU or CPS, and that's what gets our attention, this other stuff falls through the cracks. We tend not to see that. And I think it's important that we heard from her today. So whatever school it is that you're behind, or if you're not, maybe you should be, I think that's how you fix things. So we can't fix it all, but what we can do, and what we do, is we raise money every year at a big event called the Bulldog Bash, and we donate money. So as you heard, young people who've never had a new pair of underwear or a coat can have that. And how then they see themselves a little bit taller, a little bit stronger, a little bit better image of themselves than they were before that. If that's our part in this, that's enough. Love to have a magic wand. There's a lot of, what I'd fix in a hurry, but I don't have a magic wand. This is what we can do. So the reason I bring this up, folks, is when you hear all the stuff going on politically, especially, that 99.9% of it is out of your reach. You voted. This is how it is. How you're going to respond in the next 48 months coming up is everything. It's everything. And I think that often gets lost in the translation of all the stuff that goes on, that we're constantly poked at, leaving us no recourse. So whatever the issue is, as I mentioned, I'm also a veteran in the United States Coast Guard, very proud to do that. I don't worry about the veterans issues because I'm doing something to support veterans issues. I don't think so much about the environmental stuff because I'm doing something about the environmental stuff. I don't think so much about the educational stuff because I know that Dr. Moran and her staff are doing it, and we're supporting them in that. It's a pretty amazing thing when you get behind something and up underneath something that's bigger than you, and you put your shoulder and back into it. You'd be amazed at how little time you have to complain. It's an amazing thing. I highly suggest it. We're going to take a break here in a couple minutes. Coming up, have doctor. She could be a doctor. Julie Murphy's going to be on. Longtime friend, best-selling author. I asked her on for a couple of reasons. One is coming into the new year, everybody wants to do things different and better, stronger, faster, but we often don't think about our money and our funds and all that goes into that. And my dad was a banker. And I learned my value of money from him and how it works, which is very different than what Julie's going to be talking about. This is a guy who always wanted to be an architect. He ended up in banking. Matter of fact, the last bank he was at was maybe 2 miles down the road at Six Corners, on the corner down there, the Northwest National Bank. He was there till he retired. And his view of money was very skewed in some ways because of the people he had to work with. And all I ever heard was how terrible it was to have money because it causes problems. And next thing you know, you're in collections and all this stuff. So for a long time, that was my view of money. And over time, of course, that's changed with the help of people like Julie, who talks about the emotion built in behind every single decision you make with your dollars and cents. So it's well worth the listen. But before that, we got to do the news. So hold on to your lug nuts. We'll come back and do an overhaul after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, Chicago media personality, John St. Augustine.
Honored to be in the chair for Joan today. She will be back next Monday. So I was building up to this big breakthrough about the money thing, emotion behind money with Julie Murphy. And that's true. It's just not happening right now. As I was admonished by my producers sitting on the other side of the glass, hey, John, you got to talk to Dawn first. Oh, yeah, I got to put this stuff together. I've got so many moving parts in my mind. So Julie will be on in about a half hour. But first, this is, I can't even begin to, I don't even know where to start with all this. But let me just see if I can just roll some of this out. Dawn Kristy is the founder and former CEO of the Cyber Dawn. She's a futurist in artificial intelligence. I didn't even know there was such a thing. And its impact on the future of work and society. As a keynote speaker, she blends her expertise in cybersecurity and AI. She focuses on emerging risk awareness. That's something that should be underlined and put in bold. Emerging risk awareness and cyber risk mitigation while working with AI tools, models, and applications. I met her while she was working on her book, 33 Ways Not to Screw Up Cybersecurity. It provides readers with a solid foundation using examples and checklists in 33 very short chapters, because, we have no attention span left anymore, to keep them very cyber savvy. And she joins me today. Hey, Dawn. Well, she was there.
There we go.
Dawn.
I'm here.
There you are.
Hey, John.
How are you?
Nice to be here.
Good to be with you. We're on real radio, not podcast now. Very live, no swearing.
I know.
We got to clean up our language. I know.
And I'm sorry I bumped the slot here. I hope you're okay talking to me now
it was
at 3.
totally my fault, because I was, I'm working. I got a lot of pieces here, moving back and forth, so all good.
Sure.
So when we've talked a couple of times. One of the podcasts I produced, we were on with that. Then you did my show, and I had to come back and talk with this in front of a live studio audience here on WCPT, because what you're talking about, I think a lot of stuff gets lost in the shuffle, but you were ahead of the curve before there was a curve, sister. So for me, the things that you talk about, how you see this emerging AI tsunami, for lack of a better term, is just this side of fascinating and also very scary to me. I've said to you before, I think we have enough challenge with our own human intelligence, so adding artificial intelligence to this, I'm not sure where we're headed.
I appreciate that, and I just wanted to do one little side story first, because you mentioned President Carter.
Yes.
And we just had a Chicago success story recently where we're going to have the Illinois Quantum Microelectronics Park, that's a mouthful, in the south side of Chicago at the former U.S. Steelworks. Mm-hmm. And so it brings up this issue of environment and land use and land reuse. And it's funny that you tied in President Carter, because I started my career in, quote, emerging risks, working in environmental at Cigna in the insurance side. And so, what I learned back then, and even as a student, which we've talked about before, is this psychology of resistance, mm-hmm. where people either don't believe there's a risk, or even if they have insurance for the risk, they still think that they can do X, Y, Z and not have an issue. Mm-hmm. And so I think the thing that you and I have tackled before, which is probably relevant for today, is this idea of how do we balance our free will against, safety and security that would protect us. And that's the quagmire that we're in historically, back from, environmental all the way up to cyber and now to AI. We get new technology and improved technology, and oftentimes there's a risk side to it that the users are not even aware of. And so that's where I come into it.
Yeah, I know. I think we mentioned at one point in a different show about, there are people that still don't want to wear seatbelts. It can save your life. No one's telling me what to do. So as you go through the front window, I think that's the Achilles heel for humans in general, like mitigating this risk and figuring out whether it's environmental or AI or technical or whatever it is to be ahead of the curve as you are and look down the road a bit at the things that most people aren't looking at. And when the AI part, I guess, is up for debate a little bit, meaning it's been such a part of our lives already. I mean, so depending on how you define it, right?
Yes.
For example.
We take things for, I think you and I talked about one of the other shows, which is Alexa. Yeah. And also, when I drive long distance, I use Waze, and I like Waze in my phone plugged into my dash, because it tells you about, if you like to put your pedal to the metal a little bit, if you want to know about where the police are on the highway, Waze will tell you police ahead, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're going through a state like Georgia, driving north, you're going to want to know that there's police ahead. So we all have our own tools, but at the same time, here's a few examples. We have smoke alarms. Are there batteries? You have a kitchen. Do you have a fire extinguisher? Do you take the chance and say, I'm going to text and drive just this once? It should be fine. And so we're confronted with this almost daily and don't think about what our risk tolerance level is. And it varies for different things. But when it comes to cyber at the intersection of AI, these are risks that people aren't thinking about. And I thought about this before today, and that is, we're really riding the crest of an AI wave here. And you've got like AI innovation coming at bullet train speed. And then you've got adoption of it, which is not nearly as fast. There aren't as many people adopting AI as you might think. And then third is we still need to have the risk awareness for those that are adopting it or are considering adopting it. And that's where you get into this. I just joined a 2-day summit Friday and Saturday with all these great creators and innovators. And, of course, I finished this event talking about cybersecurity. And the reality is people haven't made the connection of how much better, for example, the hackers are because of AI, because they can write perfect English and perfect text. And so we actually have the human factor behind, cyber losses, and the fact that they are so much stronger in their persuasiveness because of the language skills that it's very easy to be tired one day and just click on something in an email. Mm-hmm. So cybersecurity is actually more required now in this sort of AI era than it was even before. And you and I have talked about this. The convincing of people to have cybersecurity and cyber insurance has never been an easy sell. And now you add fuel to the fire with AI capabilities of hackers. That's a pretty volatile combination.
Yeah, until you lose something, like I said before in a couple different subjects, until it's your problem, it's somebody else's problem. And then when there somehow hacks into your system, whether you're at the monolithic, size of a major corporation who is held hostage because somebody's able to hack in for whatever reason or however they did it, or it's just you yourself and you get that, that tempting email from the Nigerian prince who wants to give you $5 million because you're a nice person and you click through that. I mean, at every level, it seems like there's something going on. One of the things that I really you almost have to have. I was talking about, and coming up at the bottom of the hour, Julie will be on talking about money. When it comes to money, so much of what we do is now digitally changed. I was thinking about it the other day. I still have somebody who sends me a check once a month. They're a subscriber to my podcast. It's only $20. But it's a physical paper check. I have to drive to the bank. I kind of like that. But everything else is, I was moving money around digitally here and there. Sometimes I stop and think, where's all this money moving around to? And what safeguards are in place to keep people out? Because as you said, with every new advancing technology, all the lower life forms are going to grab onto it.
Yeah, it's funny. Just one other quick cybersecurity point. The FBI comes out with the IC3 report every year. And, you've got data breach, ransomware, business email compromise. And business email compromise is when you get duped into sending money somewhere. It's not necessarily, extracting stuff from the network. But again, if people are better at persuasion, and you're getting something from the CEO that looks real, and you're going to wire that $3 million because that was the CEO asking me to do it. These cases are the most high value. So they're not the most frequent, but they're the most severe. And that's what's called business email compromise or, funds transfer fraud. And that happens every day. And it's not just big enterprises. Small companies are forced to close their doors because they've sent these funds that they can't get back. So and that's serious.
Yeah. We were in Europe on vacation for a couple of weeks, and we were at Bletchley Park, which is where they broke the Enigma code and all that stuff for Germany in World War II. And Alan Turing, the brilliant mathematician and all that stuff. It was a really pretty amazing place to walk where they walked and sit where they sat and all that type of thing. And I happened to notice on the wall that they had just had this international symposium/workshop for AI risk. This is at Bletchley Park, where a lot of this stuff started, quite frankly, about coding and all the rest of it.
Oh, sure.
In so many ways, Alan Turing was really the father or the forefather of a lot of the computing stuff and all that. But my point is that here I am. It was just a kind of surreal. This is where this group of people lived and worked and slept and slaved to break the code in World War II to save the world, basically. They figure it probably shortened the war by 2 to 3 years and saved millions of Allied lives and civilians. And then here we have to have this decades later, not that long later, we have to have this international symposium on there's all this stuff coming that's artificially generated. It's not real, and you need to know the risk in that. And to me, I'm thinking, but this is goes into cyber warfare stuff, too. It's not just the consumer-driven end of it.
Oh, sure.
The applications for this are unbelievable.
Well, yeah, the whole nation-state attacks and as you say, warfare. I talk more on sort of a business owner level, not so much on the terrorism and the warfare. I certainly write about it, but not so much in my training presentations. But yeah, I mean, it's got multifaceted impact, and the average person isn't thinking about this. And they may see this Bletchley that I think was dramatized in one of the films, right? But the thing is, the average person simply is not thinking about it. I have free will. This is what I want to do today. Somebody told me it's risky. I don't care. I'm not updating my iPhone. I'm going to do it over the weekend or whatever it might be. And so it's the same with AI. There's these great tools, creative songs, music, videos, and all the creatives are going wild. But you just have to keep in mind that pause, think, and what are you inputting into the generative AI tool? Do you have your privacy settings? Who's going to get the information? Are there trade secrets you're putting in there that then can be used to train the device, and then it's in the language of the language model? So you just have to be thoughtful, and even if you haven't had a course or any training on risk, just if you're hearing this, say, if I'm using a new tool, and you and I have talked about this with driving a car without a lesson, using a calculator, all these inventions that came out, and it's like, wow, this is fabulous. But some of them had high risk. A calculator did not, but cars did. Mm-hmm. And people didn't have seatbelts. And then they did have seatbelts, and they didn't use them. And then there were safety rules and guardrails. And so we're really in a transformative era right now.
So we're going to take a short little time out, come back on the other side of this, because I got a couple things. You know about all this stuff, but I can't help but going into the let's just build an AI president. I had to go there, right?
Okay.
When they come back, we're going to go into all that and a couple other things. Dawn Kristy is joining me on WCPT back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, Chicago media personality, John St. Augustine.
Reminder that tomorrow morning from 6 to 8 a.m., Richard Chu will be here taking your calls and offering his views on the news of the day. Plus, he'll have a $25 gift card for Fry the Coop to give out. Chu's views. Very clever. Weekdays at 6 a.m. Central on WCPT 820. Dawn Kristy is joining me. She is the author of the award-winning book, 33 Ways Not to Screw Up Cybersecurity. And so, in full disclosure, Dawn, we've already had this conversation twice, but not on this platform. And you know what's coming, right? So here was my thought. And let me tell you where this started. I do a lot of voice work for people. I produce a lot of audio books and a lot of stuff in the audio space. And some company, I'm going to keep their name out of it because I don't want everybody to go running to see if this is, somebody local in Chicago. It's not, but I'm just going to skip the name of the company. But they're being very innovative, and somehow they were able to get the rights from dead celebrities' families to AI generate their voices to read your audiobook. And there's only half a dozen on there. I'd have to go look exactly who it was, and it really didn't matter to me what the name was. These are people, I think Judy Garland was one of them. And so on one hand, I'm thinking, well, that's pretty cool. On the other hand, I thought, this is like Nosferatu all over again. I don't want to get into this stuff with dead people reading books because they can AI generate their voice. That's where this concept started. So before I take it to the next level, what are your thoughts on stuff like that, where you can AI generate people who are no longer here and it's as if they were?
Well, first of all, there's always the chance of fraud and scams because not everybody who might get a video with that person, they may not know that the person's even deceased. Not everybody is up on all the news. So what if you have one of your favorite actors reaching out to you to donate money to a charity, and you're thinking this actor is still alive because you're not up on it, and you're going to send money or you're going to do some sort of action based on that. The thing about, creating these legitimate videos, that's one thing. But we've got this issue with deepfakes where they're actually creating the fake videos, and that's where there's the fraud, the scams, the money theft, the data theft. So, you have to be careful with where this technology is going. People are going to want digital twins of themselves.
Oh, God.
What is that digital twin going to do? And they're going to be used for all sorts of tasks that you don't want to bother.
Right.
But, there's going to be a fine line on when is it really you and when is it your digital twin. And so you get this sort of thing like, will the real John please stand up?
I can't even imagine what that would bring. Can you imagine two of me? No, I can't imagine that.
So when you talk about videos and replicating people, dead or alive, and the replication of people that are alive, there's all sorts of negative incidents that have happened with persuading people to do things. So you just have to, again, be careful. And is there a way to verify? Well, try to see if there is a way to verify it. But using it to read an audio book, I mean, the average person would say that's harmless, and it probably is. Kind of creepy, though.
Yeah.
But it just depends on your perspective. But if you're going to use it for other purposes, then you have to be, more on guard.
So this little blurb I have here, again, I'm leaving the company name out. It's a startup company, so we'll see if it gets anywhere. Judy Garland, James Dean, Sir Laurence Olivier, and Burt Reynolds' estates have all agreed to let them use their voices. What I would be fascinated by is the process. I don't know where you lift all this audio and how that would actually work. That's more fascinating to me than the actual end result. So who knows about all that piece. But what that led me to was this whole thing about how do we use AI for the greater good? Because we talk a lot about the risk that's inherent in all this stuff and how it works. And I had this thought one day, this brilliant thought, Dawn. It's brilliant, I thought, till I talked to you, was let's just build an AI president, right? So let's just go look at all the great presidents we've had in the past and their best qualities and all that stuff. And then I guess we could shovel it all into some AI hopper, and the AI guy figures out how this works and who's this and what they look like and all these type of things. You didn't think that was such a good idea. I thought it was a good idea, but you said, John, maybe not a good idea. Why is that?
Well, the large language models like ChatGPT, they are fed the data from the internet and from society. They don't self-generate this data; it's entered, and what's being entered is biased. Mm-hmm. We have discrimination and bias in our culture, and that same thing is being fed into the AI tools. So if you're going to create an AI president based on prior presidents, you only have one person of color and no women. So right there, you're inputting that bias. So when you're going to go for the ideal president, what are you going to do about people of color and women? Because they wouldn't be in that pot, so to speak, as you discussed. And that's where you run into this issue of what they call bias.
So confirmation bias is those who may or may not know. This is you look at something and go, yeah, I get that because it's an internal bias. Or if you don't get it, you don't have that bias. I totally understand it. My question is, since we're building this thing, we could kind of make it anything we want, right? So we could literally build a female of color president with all the great, you're laughing. I'm telling you, somebody's doing this somewhere. Probably just isn't me. But, so you think about these things. I guess I'm looking in some ways tongue in cheek with this, like, where is the end of this, right? Because this is the kind of thing you're going to start to see more and more of. I can tell you, and you've brought this up, people have a hard time discerning reality. Till I was 12, I thought Tokyo was really being attacked by Godzilla. So the human mind has a hard time separating this stuff. Then you add in these AI things, and I do see people online saying that's fake, that's fake. So I think we're kind of, strengthening that muscle a little bit, but still, it's going to get more and more, it's going to get worse before it gets better, in my opinion. Yours?
Well, we talked about in one of the other shows, the singularity, and the meaning of that. It comes from science, but it means when we kind of merge with AI, and where our full or partial mind will be part AI and part us, and that gets a little do-do-do-do. But the reality is we don't know where this is going in 10, 20, 30 years, or in the next few generations. And so when you think of like the Jetsons, and I read something last year where so many of those things came true. It was like these writers had no clue, and yet that happened. So right now, when you think about the 40 AI movies that have been made, I think there's something like 40. I should put a list out for New Year's. And you think about, oh my God, that is so way out there. But then here we are with some of this happening now. So it's anything goes. We have a lot of innovators in the world that are playing with this from a creative standpoint. The difficulty would be if you want to know about the risk, and the risk awareness is the rub, and I just wanted to close with this because I know we're almost at time. Mm-hmm. I may have told you this before. The Gallup poll that was done, I think it was done in the fall, and in the pandemic, we started working remotely. Post-pandemic, we started working hybrid. So some people are full remote, some do 3 days in the office, and that's called hybrid. And so what they discovered in one of these surveys was that 58% of hybrid workers have no training. It's just like, okay, split your time. We're not going to tell you how to manage it, what tool you can use there, what tool you can use there. And 51% of managers are not trained on how to team manage a hybrid team. So my thought was, are any of these people learning about AI and cyber risks? Because if you're not teaching them, basic things about maybe like handling the finances of the business, and they happen to be working hybrid, are they aware of the financial risk? So, those are the things you have to think about. We have changed our environment. We've changed our technology. We've had cyber and trying to save cyber and have cyber protection for over 30 years. I've worked in it since 2012, and I've seen the psychology of resistance, and it's carrying on now, and unfortunately it will carry on with AI. So it takes those of us that are in sort of the risk wiring to try to help people understand. We're not saying hard no to AI, but just pause a moment. Think, if you have a gut check, follow that gut check.
So, yeah, exactly. But that resistance thing goes across the board, right? So you can sit and tell somebody, hey, you may want to stop smoking those cigarettes. There's a warning on the sign that says it's going to kill you. No, it won't. And next thing you know, right. Judd's not a millionaire. You're in the hospital on an oxygen, and you wonder what happened. So to me, this is like, it doesn't matter what the subject matter is. This is what humans do. I talked earlier about President Carter's environmental legacy, and he was so far ahead of his time putting those solar panels on the roof, and then Reagan took them off. Yes. And within a decade, right? And look where we're at now. Yeah.
And I started my career in environmental, and here we are. We don't even say environmental pollution now. They just say, climate change.
Right.
But in the days of Love Canal and finding out that all that toxic waste was buried there, people were up in arms. Today it's like, it's just another river. It's just another lake, another pond. People... Yeah. Even the acceptance of it societally has shifted. And so here we are now, talking about climate change, which could have been solved or started to be solved under Carter.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And one of the great challenges with anything, even what you're talking about with this risk with AI, as I said, until it's my problem, it's not a problem. And so until it's sitting right in my backyard, until Love Canal is my backyard, it's just out there somewhere. It doesn't affect me. Nothing could be further from the truth, because at some point, somewhere, on some level, everything's connected. We live in a world that's a biosphere, but it's also a whole long line of dominoes. And if Greece's economy tanks, so does ours. And I find it fascinating. I'm sorry, real quick. I find it fascinating that people compartmentalize. We should just buy from the USA. We'd be out of business in 3 days. I mean, come on. So, this risk thing, the work you're in, I know it's about AI and environmental, but this is a real thing across the board. I'm trying to picture myself, you talking to these high-level execs and things like this, the look on their face, you're like, listen, this is coming and you're not going to like it. Like, what are you talking about? We got this. Yeah. Turns out we might not.
Or say you spend $100K on cybersecurity, and now you want to implement AI, so you take 50 of that and you put 50-50, 50 on AI, 50 on cyber, and now you've reduced your cybersecurity measures, and now you've implemented AI into the system. So again, fuel to the fire. Unless your people are, trained on risk awareness, and who's entering the data from your company? Who's the committee in charge of that? This all of this is about input to get output.
It's like a reality show.
I wanted you to address your Michael Crichton quote.
Oh, listen, I've seen, Jurassic Park says it all. The whole deal says it all. They get to a certain point at Jurassic Park, and Jeff Goldblum looks at the professor and says, just because you can make dinosaurs doesn't mean you should. And to me, that's the whole movie right there. And that's everything we do on this planet. It's just because you can do this, because you can dump this or build this or create this, maybe not a good idea when you're not looking, 7 generations down the line, what the ramifications are for that. Listen, I want to thank you for your time, Dawn.
Sure.
The book is called 33 Ways Not to Screw Up Cybersecurity. It's on Amazon and all the other places, Goodreads, LinkedIn. The best place to find you is where?
thecyberdawn.com, and on LinkedIn.
And by the way, I'm just going to go on record today saying that I was the first person to come up with the AI president idea, and if it happens, I want 10%. You heard it here first, right?
Okay,
all
will
right.
do.
Thanks, Dawn. Appreciate it. Have a great day. Back with more right after this on WCPT.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, Chicago media personality, John St. Augustine.
Coming up tonight after this show is over on Driving It Home, Patty Vasquez will be joined by Chicago Community Acupuncture Clinic Director Dr. Jason Bosell and his daughter Ava. And I can't believe they're putting this guy on the radio. I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love Scott Stannis. He's a genius. I can't wait to tune in to see what he has to say with Patty. He's going to be on with her as well. Plus, Patty will have a $25 gift certificate or gift card for Fry the Coop to give away. Driving It Home right here, weekdays from 5 to 7 p.m. on WCPT 820 on your dial. So, full disclosure, once again, I've known Julie Murphy for at least 15 years. I had her as a guest on, I believe, with Gene Chatsky when I was the producer at the Oprah Radio Network, Oprah Radio and Friends on XM Sirius Radio. It was just XM back then before they were combined as they are now. But anyway, Julie and I go way back, and I've always been enamored with her work, how she approaches it. She's just got this bare-knuckle way of going about things, but with a very quite high-minded, esoterical view of the way things really work with money. And I'm working on her audiobook with her right now called The Emotion Behind Money. And when you're starting out a brand new year and money is everywhere all the time, wall to wall, it's something to really be mindful of. And I think that's what Julie brings to the table. And she joins me right here on WCPT. Hey, Jules.
Hey, what's up, John? How are you?
I'm good, kid. How are you?
I'm fabulous, thanks.
One thing I have to say is, and I remind myself too, is like, this is FCC radio. We can't talk like we normally do on my podcast, which is, salty language. Can we call it that?
Chicago language.
It's Chicagoese. It's the vernacular of the streets, as they say. So one of the things that so much of your life resonates with me in some level that I always can't comprehend. You're one of how many kids?
There are 12 of us.
12 children in your family, in the Murphy family.
Mary and Julie, ready? Mary and Julie, Donnie, Brian, Matt, Colleen, Danny, Mark, Timmy, Peter, Johnny, and Katie.
Very impressive. You get a cookie, you can stay. So one of the things that really comes out in the work that you do in all your books and the stuff you do, I mean, it's comprehensive across the board, is what it's like for you to have broken the chains, I should say, of how you grew up around money, which became really the wound is the way for you. So the way you grew up and the way that money was introduced to you and how you related to money has done a 195 since those days, correct?
Yeah, there's no doubt. Dad was an electrician and Mom was an at-home mom of all 12. And so it was a feast or famine, laid off or not laid off, middle America, and all went to Catholic schools. And so I always say that I didn't come from money, but not only did I learn how to earn it, which I consider to be income affluent, but then it's also about building wealth, which is asset affluent. And those are two very different things in our society.
Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah, well, we've got a society that has generated incomes that are higher than any generation prior to us. And so we're rocking and rolling. The problem is we have all these credit and debt lines that we also have in addition to that higher household income. And that's income affluence. So you have cash flow to do with what it is that you want. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually building your wealth and actually building assets at the same pace that your income has gone up. So many of us have become very, very good consumers, and which is 70% of how the stock market works is based on the consumer. But that spending piece is a real deal, and we're spending more than what we're actually saving and building wealth with.
One of the more profound moments working on your Emotion Behind Money book, the audio version, which will be out at some point here in 2025, is when you talk about your personal stories. And I tell you this every time we work together. Your authenticity, I think, is your superpower. 12 kids, dad's electricians, mom's a homemaker. And, it was like the watering hole in the Serengeti at night for you guys for dinner. and yet some of these stories you tell in the book are so profound. And then those stories actually became the lessons for the book that you share with people. And one of the things that stuck with me the most is you talked about how much you enjoyed picking up the tab for other people, how that made you feel. Like somehow, you had become affluent because you were doing this. In particular, I think there was a girlfriend of yours, you guys used to go out all the time, and she never paid. And then you had this epiphany.
Yes, I did. One Friday night, I was like, hey, let's go to this place where they have steak and we'll do happy hour and all this stuff. And at the end of dinner, I said to her, I go, for all the Friday nights and Saturday nights we've been out, and you have screwed me out of tax and tip money, because she would pull out $21.12, because that's what her meal cost. And she would give it to me in cash, even the coins. And then I realized, I'm talking years later, because I would just put my credit card down going, all right, she gave me the cash, whatever. I didn't actually micromanage it. I never thought that somebody would actually do that, because that's not how I grew up. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a much more, even though we didn't have a lot of cash flow, I grew up in a much more abundant household, that there was more than enough to go around, and it always would just show up. And so she didn't even argue with me. She picked up the entire steak dinner, the drinks, everything for the entire night, because she knew she never paid for tax or tip.
But she's not going to do anything till you call her on it.
Right. Well, what it is we are who we are, right? And she's a hoarder. She holds it close to the chest, and she's got a lot of fear around spending, because she always thinks the bottom's going to drop out, where I'm like, hey, it's okay, let's do this, because there's always more that's going to show up, right? And so she's a huge, it turns out to be like she's a huge taker, and I'm a huge giver, and a lot of times those two very much so attract to each other.
Yeah. You also, if you don't mind, because the book's been out for a little while, the audio version is what we're working on, but in the book you talk about a time where, you would spend a certain amount of money per week on your family for like pizza and stuff like that. You know where this is going, don't you?
Totally know where it's going.
Would you please share this? Because I think anybody listening, I don't know how you can't not relate to some of this. Just tell that story about the pizza thing.
Absolutely. So, what it boiled down to is that because I'm such a big giver and being the second oldest of 12 children, it was always about like, okay, somebody needed a pair of shoes. Well, I had a job in high school, so I bought my brother a pair of shoes, and I didn't think anything of it. And so then when I started becoming a financial planner about 3 years in, one of my colleagues said to me going, this is not about Julie only doing for her family. This is about what are Julie's goals and what does Julie want, and you can help your family. And so I had created a savings account called a Murphy Relief Fund, so that it put me on a budget, if you will, of how much that I was willing to put into a bucket while also obtaining my own personal goals at the exact same time with my other money. And so I was so uncomfortable telling people my family no, that I would literally look in this savings account that I didn't combine with anything else, and whatever the balance in that account was, that's what I was willing to spend. And so the one week I was like, okay, my family was like $30 a week or something like that. And I said, all right, I can't do it. I'm sorry. I only have $30. And I would start telling people no, but I was verbalizing that. And so one day, one of my sister-in-laws had called me up, and she was like, oh my gosh, I was thinking we bring the kids downtown and this would be so fun. We'll come see your apartment. I was in my 20s, no big deal. And I was so excited that somebody from the South Side was actually going to travel downtown to my apartment, because that's like China to most people who live on the South Side. And because I was on the North Side. And then I said, oh my God, this is so great. Yeah, we can go walk over to the beach. We can do this. We can do that. And then she goes, oh, and Don and I wanted to try this pizza place, and we were just thinking if you didn't spend the money this week that you could actually buy the pizza for our dinner that night. And I said, oh. She goes, well, that money that you allocate for the family every week. And I was like, well, I already spent it this week on, so-and-so. And she goes, oh, well, that's too bad. Well, we'll have to do it a different time. And I said, so you're not coming down to see me then? And yeah, they didn't. It was like a kick in the head. And, but it was a lesson for me that it really, others people's behaviors are not necessarily about them. They're about what needs to shift in you, because I truly believe that we call people into our lives to play a certain role, so we learn the lessons for our souls to evolve. And so that taught me, oh, wow, I was holding this boundary, yet very uncomfortable, but I wasn't doing it at my cost any longer, because I was still accomplishing and getting all the things that I desired because I had limited giving to others from this other savings account. Mm-hmm. And there's also a positive thing that came out of that. You know, after a couple of years of doing that, one of my brothers said to me, he goes, Jewel, my alternator went on my car, and he had just got out of college. He was broke. He had his first job, and he's like, I need my car fixed. It's like $1,582. And I looked in the savings account, and there was like $852 in there. I go, dude, I got $852. And I go, it's all yours. And so I gave him the $852. He figured the rest out. And, you know, a couple of years after that, he actually wrote me a check and said, put that back in the bucket for when somebody else in the family needs some help. So it taught the lesson not only to myself, but also to other family members, which was amazing. One
of the other things that I think is important, and we're going to jump to a break here in about 2 minutes, and we'll come back and continue this. But one of the other things I thought was interesting, how forthcoming you were, that at some point you basically, because you're the second oldest, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So you became like the mom, in the mom role to your siblings, which probably wasn't your job, but you did it anyway.
Yeah, it was just the role that I played, right? Mom had babies always in diapers. By the time they got to 2, me and my older sister took care of them.
Yeah. But I'm going to tease this a little bit. We're going to take a break, come back. I want to tease because I think the rest of that has to do with a license plate. And we will talk about that on the other side of this. Julie Murphy's joining me. She is the best-selling author of numerous books. Right now, we're talking about her book called The Emotion Behind Money. She has Awaken Your Wealth is out as well. And I'm so privileged to work with her on the audio version, which will be coming out at some point in 2025. We will continue with this right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, Chicago media personality, John St. Augustine.
Glad to be back with you today on WCPT, filling in for Joan. She'll be back next Monday. With me today is the best-selling author of The Emotion Behind Money, Awaken Your Wealth, and a whole slew of other great products, Julie Murphy. And I met Murph, it's got to be 15, 18 years now at this point, right? Quite a while.
Yeah.
And I remember bringing you into Harpo to talk with Gene Chatsky, who was the money maven at that time for NBC. And pieces of the conversation floated through my mind as we do work together. And Gene comes from a very different button-down kind of lock and load, boring is best, long-term, very much what you would read about in the papers when it comes to investing. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And you were coming with this whole emotional piece of why people do things. And I remember watching this go back and forth, the two of you, and these little bulbs going off over her head. Like, no one's talking about this stuff, and they need to be. So here we are fast forwarding, and you've been doing this for so long, and I know that the response you get from people is profound and loud. But that last piece I brought up about, being the second oldest and taking the mom role, you were sharing, if you don't mind, this was such a piece that you said, I think it was about a week ago we were taping. You brought this up. You actually got pretty emotional about it. And it was like this one move that you made kind of broke that cycle of being in that position as the mom and put you in a new direction. It was a simple thing as a license plate.
Absolutely. I mean, well, we all have these roles in our families, right? And they create these limiting belief systems that we all operate on. And, when you show up, that's why some people don't like to go to family parties or the holidays, because it's like the role that you've always
right.
been is what people expect you to show up as. And when I was in college, I had applied for vanity plates. I felt like I was a free bird going down to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. I'm like, whoo! People are like, why are you living in the dorms? And I'm like, because I can close the door to the bathroom? Because I had privacy in the dorms. But to most people, it wasn't. And I applied for these vanity plates, and I asked for Murph 3 because 3 was my number.
Mm-hmm.
It had nothing to do with my birth order. But I wound up with Murph 12. And I was like, oh, yeah, my identity, right? My role
12.
in life was one of 12 kids, Murph 12, the second oldest of 12 kids. And, for years, my mom would just say to me, she'd be like, well, wouldn't that just be great if I could just get those plates off your car? Because I have 12 kids. And I'd be like, they're mine. You're not touching my plates. You know, like this was, it was like the tug and pull power play between a mom and a daughter. And then one day when I was doing my MBA with the University of Notre Dame, I'm there in South Bend, Indiana, and the professor sitting there and they do these 360 evaluations. And he's like, why are you choosing to keep your mom's identity all these years? And I'm like, huh? He goes, are you ready to let go of that story? And I was like, what?
Wow.
And all of a sudden I heard him. And he goes, so that Christmas, I actually decided to get new plates. And I really believe that we choose to live our lives the way we live. And so I applied for new vanity plates that said choose to, because I believe that you can choose to do anything with your life if you want to, because you are the creator of your life. And then I wrapped up Murph 12 plates in wrapping paper and gave it to my mom, and I've never seen her cry so much.
Oh.
And she loved it, and she used them, and she passed away this past March, and we actually put the license plate there with her there at Holy Sepulchre.
Profound stuff, my friend. And so, once again, the reason I ask you all these things is I want people to get a sense of who you are. This is not cut and paste template type stuff when it comes to building wealth. I know you ask people a series of questions when they're sitting in front of you to become possible clients and associates, and you're asking them questions that no one else that works with money management asks them. What are some of the things that you say?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. When I published my first book, The Emotion Behind Money, one of my colleagues says, you ask your clients these things? I'm like, well, you don't? And he goes, no way in hell would I ever ask those questions. I was like, okay. Well, it's about the fact that, it's one of the reasons I gave up a business suit, because if people are going to reveal their blood, sweat, and tears of what they want their life to be and the mistakes that they feel that they've made and how to right the ship, and these are all hardworking people, right? Everyone always does. They have good intentions that they're like, okay, I want to do right by me. I want to do right by my family. And so that's why I didn't want to be a mahogany desk financial firm any longer. I wanted to ask questions like, if we were sitting here 3 to 5 years today, what do you want to create in your life? And they look at me and they go, what do you mean, financially? And I go, I don't care. It could be the money. It could not be the money. And you know what, John? No one ever says what they dream of in 3 to 5 years with their money, ever. Mm-hmm. They always say, well, this is what I want for my kids. This is what I want for my family. This is what I'd love in my career. This is what I love. And then the money is usually just the result of all of those things, which is why the subtitle of my book is called Building Wealth from the Inside Out. Because so often we feel that we have to build wealth based on, well, the person in the cubicle next to me knows better than I do. Nope. You know how to live your life better than any other person on this planet. The problem is we've been taught that something within yourself is flawed, and to trust something outside of yourself more than trusting your own gut or your own intuition. And so those questions that I ask people is I'm looking for that gold inside of them that is probably tarnished or lost because they've lost a sense of themselves. And I'm waking that up inside of them to get them back on that track.
It comes to mind as you're having this conversation. I'm imagining people sitting down in your office and the look on their face when you ask them that. And I juxtaposition that to these commercials on television where there's not a speck of paper on the person's desk saying, we do it better than anybody else. I'm thinking if you did it better, your desk would look like my desk. And my desk does not look like your desk, so forget that. But there seems to be, it's like a trading places, like the movie Trading Places mentality around investment and wealth and things like that. And I think one of the things that I've always felt most impressed by for your work is you're saying this is an inclusive club, not an exclusive club to become wealthy.
Right? Well, because every single human being is deserving of wealth and abundance. And it's our limiting belief system and, if I might say, our debt system in this country is set up to make people feel like they are not enough, that they are not worthy, and they are not deserving of wealth and abundance. And that couldn't be further than the truth because there's more than enough to go around for everybody. But we create these suffering cycles because we hook into, I personally feel like our debt system has been created to control the masses because you can't ever get ahead.
Right.
And we have to choose as individuals to choose not to play in that ball game. Like choose to play a different game. Because you can still get every single thing you want in your life, and you don't have to go into debt for that.
Yeah, that whole debt thing, and this goes back to what I was saying a little bit earlier. My dad, the big button-down banker guy who worked his way up from, the teller all the way to collections and loans and savings and loans and stuff, and really knew the business inside out. He would talk about the difficulty. He'd come home from work, and he'd sit at the table, and he was in a terrible mood because he had spent the last 3 hours talking with people who were so deep in debt, didn't have any money to pay their loans back, and how much of an effect it had on them, their credit score at the time, and how much it affected my dad, quite frankly. I would see this guy come home thinking, God, he hates being here. What he hated was talking to people who were just swallowed up in debt. And the only way back then to help them out was to extend a loan or do something. And that was really his decision. It really weighed on him heavily to make those decisions about debt and things like that. And over time, credit has become so easy. I mean, there was a time, I don't know if we still do this, where people would pull out, credit cards to buy groceries. So everything comes at a price. And I think my dad gave me a lot of great lessons, but the one is he would always say there's the price you pay for that thing, whatever it is, then there's the price you pay for having that thing. And the second price you pay is bigger than the first price on the sticker. So along those lines, when you're dealing with people and you talk about debt, because I guarantee you, Jules, probably half, if not 3/4 of the people listening to the show, there is debt somewhere. And however that was incurred, what do you say is kind of the easiest, best, as Will Rogers said, right? If you want to get out of a hole, quit digging it. In your perspective, what is the best way to start getting out of a debt hole?
Well, first of all, you have to forgive yourself for what you've created thus far, because if you keep beating yourself up, that's actually not going to help. So that's first and foremost. Second is, we need to get our debt payments on autopilot, just like our paycheck deposits into our checking account. And the reason for that is because Einstein proved that everything is energy, and our emotions that we have are energy in motion. So if you are constantly paying off that debt, working hard and paying off that debt, and then an emergency happens in life, and then you have to use your debt that you just paid off because that emergency happened, if you don't stop that cycle of those low vibrating emotions of frustration, sadness, anger, if you don't stop that perpetual cycle by just have those debt payments be on autopilot while you're also then building yourself up an emergency reserve, so when an emergency happens, you become your own bank and you use your own cash. Mm-hmm. And because what you've got already going on in debt, you got to just put those on autopilot. And as you start to build up wealth, so like I'll have people who, build up their emergency reserves up to, let's just say it's $4,000. And I say, okay, now let's take $1,500 of that and chunk down your highest interest rated debt. But build up your reserves because you got to create some kind of backup. Because if you only focus on debt and you only pay off debt, then all you're ever going to create is more debt. And so we have to shift your energy around money to be playing offense, be the offensive line as opposed to the debt defensive line. Right?
Right. And, Jules, and I've said this before, we got about 2 minutes to go, but, I never took a class. I know you can take them, but if it was a financial class, the only thing I learned to do was write out a check and maybe a deposit slip. Luckily, my dad was in the industry, and I learned a lot of that. But most people, I think, to some greater or lesser degree, are kind of financially illiterate.
For sure. Right, because it's not taught in school. And if it's not taught in your homes and it's not taught in school, then it's the school of hard knocks.
And then we had to read books like The Emotion Behind Money to figure all this stuff out, which is a good thing.
Absolutely.
So if there was one takeaway that you can throw out to the audience as we go into 2025, and you said about forgiving yourself and leaving all that stuff behind. We know people racked up debt at Christmas. I don't know what the average is anymore. It used to be about $1,500. And I come from a time when you would start a Christmas club. You'd put out $50 in a month. The next thing you know, you're as rich as a millionaire. You could buy all the stuff you want. You just start over next year. I don't know if those still exist. But going into 2025, what's a real common sense, boots to the ground, Julie Murphy in your back pocket kind of thing to take with you?
Well, I absolutely love online savings accounts to do the things that, like you're talking about with Christmas Club. If you know that you just spent $1,200 on Christmas, well, then go online, open up an online savings account somewhere, and call it your Christmas fund, and then put $50 every time you get a paycheck. So you got $1,200 sitting there when it comes to next December. And you can do that when you pay off your car, make your car payment to your car fund savings account. Like, this is you becoming your own bank and loving yourself up and above everything and anything else. And you absolutely can do that. And then surround yourself with people who are going to support what you want to create financially not around people who are going to help you stay in that debt cycle and struggling cycle.
Well said, well said. If you want to find any of Julie Murphy's books, they're on Amazon.com. Even though I appreciate what Amazon does, I still liked it better when it was just a river because it gets a little murky and mucky. But go buy her books there. And just to make sure that you know this, even though we are currently working on her audiobook, The Emotion Behind Money, we did complete the 4 Spiritual Laws of Money. And that is available in audio as well on Amazon. Julie, every time we talk, whether we're doing it in private for your audio stuff or you're doing a live show like this, I just find it so important what you're talking about because money, it's in everybody's life to some greater or lesser degree, and understanding it more helps us move forward, I think. So I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. And if anyone needs a support system, come to juliemurphy.com. We have anything to help anybody at any level.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it, Jules. Thanks. Mm-hmm. All right, Jennifer Weigel coming up. That I'm pretty sure is correct. Is that right, Paul?
If she's here.
If she's here. Well, otherwise I'm going to carry the ball myself. Anyway, short time out. Back with more on WCPT after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, Chicago media personality, John St. Augustine.
I hear that little blurb there, and you got to understand, I've been doing this 30 years. No one's ever gone, Chicago media personality. I get the biggest kick out of that. Hope you paid that guy pretty good. A couple minutes ago, Julie Murphy, again, you can find her stuff on Amazon. All her books are there. She said about getting rid of that license plate that was Murph 12, and then she got Choose To, which is her, I guess, metaphor for choosing a different life. Well, I cannot pass up this to work it in. Somebody would give me some props, Paul, because tomorrow from 6 to 8, it's Richard Chew. I'm going off the Choose To license plate from last segment. Are you with me?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, good to know. He'll be here taking your calls and offering his views on the news of the day. That's, of course, Richard Chew. He'll have a $25 gift card for Fry the Coop to give away and Choose Views, unlike Julie's license plate, which is Choose To. We're talking about Choose Views. They're connected. Work with me here. I'll be here just for a couple more hours. Weekdays at 6 a.m. Central on WCPT. In the studio, let me just set the scene. I show up here. I used to get Super Dog. I used to get Portillo's. Sparky used to set me up. What do you want for lunch, John? Thanks for coming in, John. Sit over there, get food, water. All the higher-ups would come in and say hi. That doesn't happen. Today I walk in, no Super Dog. I had to get lunch on my own. And I get half a cup of tepid water on the way in, a couple of handshakes at it. Jennifer Weigel walks in the studio, and it's like, let's roll. The red carpet's rolled out, lights are flashing, everybody's coming in. Miss Weigel, would you like some water? And here's this, and here, and I know, and I'm sitting there going,
I get hugs.
I mean, this is amazing.
Did you not bring donuts for everybody,
No donuts.
John? What
no,
is
that's
wrong
my
with you?
fault.
Yes.
It's my fault for not buttering the bread over here.
Correct.
Can I just read your whole bio?
No, that's silly.
Jennifer is an award-winning broadcast journalist who has been on a journey to bring spirituality into the mainstream media for over 20 years. She's an Emmy Award winner for her on-camera reporting for CBS. Her work has covered all platforms from print journalism, where she worked as a columnist for both the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times, to radio and television, known for interviewing best-selling authors in the spiritual space. You can find some of her interviews on the YouTube channel right here. You got to click on her website to figure it out. She also has I'm Spiritual, Damn It, which is one of the reasons she's in the studio. Good to see you.
Are you spiritual, damn it?
Yes, I almost had a whole breath to do that. That was pretty good. I'm a geezer at this point. Yeah,
John.
Good to see you too. So without further delay and further ado, I brought up a little bit earlier about how I think the news affects people. Mm-hmm. And if you're a consumer of the news, you may not even realize that. But you were on the other side of all this for a long time, the whole if it bleeds, it leads thing. And that's been kind of like a mantra for you to kind of make people aware of how this kind of affects us.
Not only does it affect us emotionally, but it affects us physically. Because when I was in the throes of it, I covered some big stuff. We covered 9/11. I covered elections. I was there for Obama's inauguration. I mean, I did a lot of big things. And everybody is impacted by a headline. Mm-hmm. And if you're terrified to leave your house, then what do? You turn on the news. You want to know what's going on. And they feed on that fear to make a buck. They feed on that fear to get more viewers. And it was a model that for a while was my life. I mean, I didn't know any other life, John. I was raised in this world.
Yeah,
my
your
dad
of course, Tim Weigel, everybody.
My
we got
mom
people
was
walking
in,
that were, that knew your dad from back in the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But this was my life because I didn't didn't know any other way other than storytelling until I did, until I chose to switch gears and realize, wait a minute, information is power. Education is important. And there's multiple angles to every single story, and nobody was telling every angle. And so when I got the power, if you will, to kind of use my voice to talk about what's working instead of what's broken, I noticed my health got better, my life was happier, and it literally was like attracts like. It's science. It's frequency. It is not woo-woo. It's like what you think, what you put out comes back. It is like a broadcast tower. Right now, people are listening to this frequency in their radio, on their computer, however it's coming through. And so which one are you going to choose? Are you going to choose to broadcast sludge, or are you going to broadcast things that inspire you to do other things that make a difference, have an impact, and help educate people to stay together like a community? And that's where I prefer to be these days.
Was there a make or break point or story or event that said, "Oh, this is enough"?
Well, 9/11 was a pretty big one. And when I came into the newsroom after the towers had been hit, I was told, go get in the van. They think the Sears Tower is next. This is before it was Willis Tower. I mean, and I was like, you want me to go where? You want me to go where you think a plane's going to hit? And then what happens? Like, it was just, that's the automatic, like, go where the headline is, go. And when I was like, no, that didn't feel right. And then they realized that was a really bad idea. That's when I started to think, maybe this isn't for me. But there were a lot of fires and hit and runs, John, where it was like, go find the mom of the 3 dead kids. Anyone got a sandwich? You know, it's just was like they were ordering lunch. And to me, I'm an empathic person. I now know that's a term, empath. I didn't know what the heck that was. And I'm sensitive to other people's pain. So it was hard for me to stick a microphone in someone's face and say, how do you feel right now? Your 3 kids just died in a fire.
Right. That
became difficult. And then when my dad died of a brain tumor at the age of 56, people were sticking microphones in my face. How do you feel? I was like, how do you think I feel? Get out of my driveway. So that's really what it was. My dad died, and I was like, this is just not a way to live.
There's a desensitizing that takes place, in anything. So one of the tenets of kinesiology, which is my secondary degree, is called SAID, Specific Adaptation to Imposed Demands. And that means you either adapt or you don't to the demand placed on you. And sometimes these are demands that we place on ourselves. Other times it's accidents, things outside of our scope of influence, and we have to learn how to adapt to them. Otherwise, we don't. PTSD is a direct result of not being able to adapt to the demand placed on you. So I dealt with that for years. I was electrocuted when I was 19, and when I was 27, I was in a car accident. You shouldn't be here twice.
Right.
It took that second incident, not accident, because I started to see it something that needed to happen, not was a mistake.
Happening for you, not to you.
Correct. Yeah. And so I was able to separate what happened to me and start to learn how to respond to that without Xanax, for example, that they wanted to keep giving me. It was a great trip for about a half hour, but I couldn't do anything, right? So, but I had to learn how to get out of that stuff. And I started to see everywhere where we have this stress, traumatic stress from our lives, professionally, personally, physically, you name it. And we are ill-equipped to deal with this stuff. And it deals with us instead.
If we had more consciousness about the fact that information can be used to either make or break somebody's, even the nervous system and how you react to stuff, those alerts on your phone, when I got those alerts off my phone, I realized every time they would go off, I would have a physical reaction to I'm late. I waited tables for years. I can still stack 5 plates on my left arm. I'm very proud of that. But when I would have dreams of, walking in and you have 4 tables, they haven't gotten bread yet, you're late, what's wrong? That kind of anxiety, or you show up for a test, you haven't studied French in 8 years, how are you going to pass? That would happen to me for years after I left the news business, thinking I was late for something. And after a while, I don't know, I guess I was a glutton for punishment because I decided to go back to morning radio a few years ago, and that was not the right environment. But I thought enough had changed that maybe I could go back, and then I realized it really hadn't changed much at all. And somebody's got to be the first to do something right. So thank you for having a conversation like this, because it doesn't happen often.
When I got into radio back in 19, never mind what year it was, when I talked to the people who wanted to give me this opportunity to speak, I had 5 shows to get it right, 5 hours. I've never done this. I'm 37. And the circumstance around it really didn't matter at that point, except I'm sitting in front of the owner and the GM, and they're like, what do you want to talk about? And I said, well, I don't want to talk about politics and beat it in the ground. I don't want to beat sports in the ground, because that's not helping me get where I want to go. Those are diversions to me. You can only vote once every 2 years or every 4 years, then you got to deal with it. And if you live in Chicago, and you got to watch the Bears. You might as well start bucking up because this is how it is. So those are the things that grab most of the attention.
Right.
But we can't I'm not going to be coaching the Bears, even though I should.
You'd be great.
Yeah, I'd be great at it.
I just bumped into Brian McCaskey a couple weeks ago. I was like, hey.
Hire John. So there's that piece. And these things that are out there, even politics, we voted. You're going to have to gird your loins for the next 48 months, depending on how you voted and back and forth. But it's all in the response to things. And once I learned that and got out of the look what's happening to me thing and look what's happening for me, as you said, everything started to change. So when I sat with these people and said, I'll talk about some of this stuff, but if I make this the mainstay, I'm contributing to the problem, just talking about what's not working.
Right. I remember being in the news truck one morning and we were waiting to cover something. Somebody hadn't shown up, so we have to literally sit in the van and wait for somebody to show up so you can go stick a microphone in their face and say, how do you feel this parishioner of your church died, and blah, blah, blah. So I was sitting there, and Jim Ryan was my cameraman, great man, still around in the Chicago area, fantastic human being. And I said, today is going to be the worst day. I just made this comment at 5:15 in the morning, and he looked at me and he said, how on earth do you know? It hasn't happened yet. What are you thinking? And I'm like, well, I have to do this and this and this. And I was gloom and dooming my day to come before it had even unfolded.
Yeah.
But that was my wiring.
Yeah, it's the response trigger.
Exactly. And you've got to rewire consciously or it won't rewire. And so I say this to my son all the time. I'm like, what you think, thoughts become things. What you state matters.
I only agree with that halfway.
Really?
Because if that was true, I'd have been Farrah Fawcett by the time I was 18.
Okay.
So let's just be clear on that. There's a
Within
point.
reason.
Within reason. Okay. I knew you were going to say it, so I had that teed up. But anyway, we're going to jump out here in a couple of minutes. But the one thing I realize every time you and I talk is we probably have about 75 years of media experience between us. We've been at this a long time.
We started when we were 7.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so when you're behind the scenes in this stuff, and I meet people who are not in the media, they're listeners, they're consumers, and they talk about this and this and this. I'm like, well, it kind of doesn't work that way behind the scenes, but I'm glad you enjoy what you're listening to. But I can clearly remember at a major other radio station here in the city, I was there for a couple of years, and when the news would come on, I had to turn off my headset. I could not listen to the same stuff over and over and over again about accidents, bombings, whatever it is, because we get so desensitized. I couldn't tell their people's names 10 minutes later. I couldn't tell you where they lived or how old they were or how they died or whatever. But it's so much of it, I think it diminishes our humanity in so many ways. So any chance you and I have an opportunity to talk, we need to kind of counterbalance that. We're not going to change the radio industry, but we can make sure the radio industry doesn't change us.
Use it as a force for good. There's so many things that we can do to connect people, inspire people, and inform people. Information, like I said, it's powerful if you use it the right way. It's not about being first. That's what they would use. It's about being first versus being accurate. Mm-hmm. And I think we've lost some accuracy along the way in this urgency to be first.
Not to mention the fact that there are about a bajillion outlets that were not there when you and I got started in this business. And everybody needs to make a dime. In order to get a dime, you need an audience. In order to get an audience, you got to figure out who they are. Right. And you got to drill into it over and over and over again and make sure they keep coming back, whatever that might be. Mm-hmm. So Fox News gets sued, $785 million, has to admit they're just an entertainment organization.
Right.
Couldn't tell me that today. I mean, they don't care.
Right,
so when I look at these things, you see how, in my opinion, my observation, definitely my experience, that as Mr. Rogers said, the late great Fred Rogers, he would use the space between the camera and the viewer as sacred. And for us, it's the microphone.
Right.
And I find that, everybody I've talked to today, from talking with Dawn Kristy about AI risk to talking with Dr. Heidy Moran at Schurz about her challenges at running a school, to Julie Murphy talking about, this is all stuff you don't hear. Not in long form, for sure. And that's what I wanted to bring to the opportunity to sit here today and for Joan for a little bit. Jennifer and I will come back in just a couple seconds right here on WCPT after this.
'Tis the season, and with the advent of serious gift-giving of the latest electronic devices, a new form of pollution is being created. E-waste. From iPads to iPhones to handheld games, Americans will spend $99.5 billion this holiday season on electronic gadgets. The one constant about technology is that the minute you buy it, it becomes obsolete, as newer, faster, and more attractive models are already being produced, which creates a glut of e-waste, or electronic garbage. It's estimated that the average U.S. resident generates about 66 pounds of e-waste per year. Recycling e-waste is important because the components used in them often contain heavy toxic metals that shouldn't be in a landfill or burned in an incinerator. So when you get that new electronic gadget that replaces the one you got for Christmas last year, don't toss it. Recycle it. I'm Bill Curtis, and Earth Matters.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, Chicago media personality, John St. Augustine.
Just want to drop some of those Earth Matters in the show when I had the opportunity to do that. Bill and I worked on that for a long time. We well over 300 episodes, and one of the shining examples, I think, the ones we were most proud of is that I had read that microbeads were in Lake Erie. These are polyethylene beads used in facial scrubs back in the day. Why polyethylene needs to be in there, I don't know. But some manufacturers said this is good, but they don't break down.
No.
And they were finding these in the Great Lakes, and fish thought they were
eggs.
Food.
Yeah.
We're going to eat them.
Mm-hmm.
Guess who eats the fish?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I had heard about this. It was a little small blurb in some paper, and I wrote this Earth Matters around it. And it was a real simple thing. Hey, ditch the polyethylene beads and use a biodegradable soap like they did in the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
I know. So Bill was doing a talk at Granger, I believe, in Ohio. And before he started, the CEO, a woman pulled him off the side, says, I listen to these Earth Matters all the time. She said, that one with the polyethylene beads, it was like I was washing my face and I heard it on the radio.
Yeah.
And she said, I thought, well, this is ridiculous. So she switched. Little switch. But it was a switch nonetheless. Mm-hmm. It was a conscious thought that she had off the information. By the time we were done with that, we had run 4 more of those, and it had worked us all the way to the White House. One of the last pieces of legislation Obama signed on the way out the door was banning polyethylene beads. It all started with a radio piece. It went to the Illinois State Legislature. It worked its way up this food chain. But that's just a perfect example of information leading to transformation if you allow it to do so. So these are the kind of things when I think about, Doug Farr's coming up in a few minutes. You and I spoke at the Climate Action Museum, I don't know, a couple months ago. Yeah. And I didn't even know there was a Climate Action Museum.
Right in the heart of the city. Beautiful facility. Gorgeous.
Right. So, but speaking of speaking, you're going to be speaking in a few weeks, speaking.
So I'm a storyteller, right?
You are.
And that's what I tell people. They say, what are you doing now? You left CBS. What are you doing? You're not doing radio. You're not doing this. Well, I'm a storyteller, and I go where I'm asked. And so my one-woman show, which is stories from the trenches of actually evidence of really wonderful, sort of miraculous things happening. Mm-hmm. And so I want to inspire people with these stories. And so I started it again. Let's see, the first time I did it was in 2008, I think. And I would bring it back on occasion. And now it's, of course, changed a lot.
I remember seeing you at a small theater off
Viaduct.
Yeah, it was by the Viaduct. Yeah.
That's right, the Viaduct Theater. And then it moved to the Chicago Center for the Performing Arts. And then I was in Glenview. I was at the Gaslight Theater. I was at the Laughing Academy. I did some stuff at Zanies. I'm just going where I'm invited because it's comical. Some of these, you can't make this stuff up.
No. And by the way, I just want to give an endorsement. I've seen her do it on stage. But this reminds me of our conversations off the air where we can use certain language you can't use on the air. And so when you're in full bloom with this stuff, it's freaking hilarious.
It's so fun. So the Wayfarer Theaters in Highland Park, January 13th. It's a 7 p.m. show. This is an outstanding facility. So if you go to Wayfarer Theaters, and Wayfarer is Wayfarer, theaters.com. Just click on events. It's $20 and it's a night of storytelling. So I hope some people will come because we've got a big facility. It's been lovely. I was there October 27th. We had a full house. And the guy Steve Sirowitz, who runs the Wayfarer, happened to be in the audience for my show at the Laughing Academy. And he said, will you please come? So I go where I'm invited these days, John. I'm done banging down doors with bloody knuckles.
I'm telling you.
So if anyone's listening and they want a storyteller for an event where people go, wow, that's really fascinating. Jen's for, I'm for hire. Bring it on. Let's go. I'll come to your office. I'll come to your neighborhood, wherever.
Yeah. I remember when you called me, you were excited because those shows they sold out. And something's going on with this. And I think, as I told Julie a little bit earlier, and most people I work with, authenticity is the superpower.
Right.
No holds barred, no BS, no holding back. I've seen you do this. Some of the stuff, the material you've tried it out of me, friggin' hilarious. And unless you're on the inside of this stuff, from the media perspective, you wouldn't believe half the stuff you talk about and how this all went down. And I always get a kick out of, because I'm not in the world as much as you were in the TV side. I could care less. When they told me today that the camera's not working for Facebook Live, I'm like,
great.
Thank you. Even though I will say, and I was telling Andy, the program director outside, that there was a time, or maybe it was my lunch, I can't remember. I didn't get lunch, by the way, today from Superdog. Do you know this?
I can't believe you're functioning.
Yeah, Matt owes me lunch.
What is this man going to do without his mystery meat? I don't know.
I am
really
wasting away as we speak. But in the late 90s, like 98, 99, I was on the air in Michigan, and Charter Communications was a fledgling company at the time.
Sure.
And they said, we want to put a camera in your studio on TV. And I'm like, what? Why? I'm doing radio.
Right.
No, we're just going to try it. So they tried it, and they did it for about a year. And they gave me a little toggle. I could run it myself and change things. Not a lot, just change here and there. The book was up there, whoever my guest was. And I asked them, I was going, it's going okay. Then I found out I was in 80 markets on television, and they never told me, which means they were selling advertising. Somebody needs to write John a check, and they did.
Yeah.
But at that time, it was myself, Howard Stern, Don Imus, and some other guy were the only people, and I thought, that's just crazy. Now,
that's all they do.
Everybody. But for me, the audio piece is most important because you need to listen, not look.
Right.
We're so visually overstimulated that if we can't see it, sometimes we just dismiss it. So when I get a chance to do live radio or even podcasting, when you and I work together, I think it's all about the voice.
Agree. And that's, again, it goes back to frequency.
Yeah.
How are you using your frequency? When I started out doing sports for Johnny B in the morning, Jonathan Brandmeier, he would put a curtain around himself.
Exactly.
So that he would not be distracted with the visual because he was thinking of the person in the car and what their experience was. And he wanted it to be as perfect as it could be for them.
Yeah.
So, we've had a lot of opportunities and he was authentic, very much enjoyed being there. And that's the thing. So many people phone it in. But you and I love this communication stuff. So if we just show up and set the intention for an honest communication, that's when the magic happens.
I think it's important because I grew up around, the voices on the radio for me were not that invasive, except for the fact that my dad would turn on the radio at 5 a.m. when he woke up, and it would stay until 10 o'clock at night when he went to bed. And that was like the soundtrack of our lives. And it varied who the speakers were, who the people were, what they were talking about. And I never would have guessed this would be a career for me, but it became a calling. And so I've never heard stop.
Right.
So for lack of any other common sense, I just continue to do whatever's put in front of me. I will say that live radio is great. Coming to a studio is great. Great to see Paul again. But I got to wear pants. When I'm doing podcasting, I don't have any pants on.
And you take your slippers shoes off, you put on real shoes.
Absolutely, drop trout.
Well, hey, speaking of, when I was doing the news business, when I was anchoring for CBS, I mean, some people would show up in their pajama bottoms and slippers.
Because in top is all you need to see, right?
Exactly. I don't want to name names, but I would be like,
drop
names.
Is
she wearing pajama pants? Yeah, people would do that. I mean, and then in the commercial breaks, they're fixing their hair and then putting it back and then talking about all the gloom and doom, but got to make sure the hair looks okay.
Well, that's kind of like the Zoom thing is now, right? You don't have to have any clothes on below the waistline. You're just sitting there. Right. I can't tell if Paul's got pants on now. He's like right there.
Sure he's clothed.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, I would have noticed.
Yeah. So we've seen a lot of changes in the media over the last 30 plus years, both you and I. And I don't know if I've ever asked you this, but what do you think has been the most positive change and one that's been the most negative, if you can come up with something?
Well, I got a kid who's in college now, which is just crazy to say that sentence. And he had to write a paper about, that, and he was writing about how the politics were influenced by social media and that people, especially his age, were so influenced. And they're now able to vote. They're 18.
Right.
And the social media, again, the urgency of being first instead of being right, it influenced a lot of people. And so fact-checking, and they talked about fact-checking. I think what's the scariest thing now, John, is that anyone can have a byline. There used to be a checks and balances.
Yeah.
You couldn't be called a columnist or a journalist without credentials. And now people have a blog, and suddenly they're an influencer, and that has more merit than somebody who got a degree. That scares the crap out of me, because you really are just reading whatever is getting the most clickbait.
Right.
So that to me is just unfortunate. You've got to do some homework on who you are following and what they are up to.
Bill Curtis and I always have had this ongoing conversation. He takes the side that with the advent of the internet, we're all going to become geniuses and smart because look at all the information. Like, I don't know what you're smoking because I don't think so. I think it just reaffirms confirmation bias. I think there's going to be small pieces of particles that break off and people go, I never learned that, and now I know it, and I'm going to do something different. But I think for the most part, it just puts people back in their corner.
Right.
Unfortunately.
But I think what you're doing with audiobooks, what I'm doing with audiobooks, I can't tell you, and you get it too. I get emails from people in Japan and Switzerland who found me on Audible, and they're listening to my audiobooks, and I'm thinking, how did that? So that to me is when connection is fantastic. And just like this is going to live online. Somebody might click and listen to this conversation and be inspired and go order one of your audiobooks or my audiobooks, whatever. It just takes one. It only takes one.
Or go see you at the theater.
Come see I'm Spiritual Damage January 13th at the Wayfarer. Are you going to come ever?
What time is that? No, why would it come? We work together. I hear this, all the time.
You don't need to hear my stories.
I get the show I got the show today when I'm sitting here waiting for my guest to come in, and the whole crew shows up, the staff, everybody, to escort you into the office and give you accolades and shower you with gifts.
I got hydration. I got water.
It seemed like a lot more than that to me, sister. Hey, you going to stick around? You got to go.
I got to scoot. I got to go have dinner with Andy Murray.
Oh, just drink now. Got a name drop. One of the Murray brothers. This is Paul. It's getting deep in here, brother.
Murray. Eat, drink, and be Murray.
It's a great
Everybody
book.
should order that book.
It's a great. It's like from their family, right?
It is. It's family recipes. That was another fun side project. No hit and runs, no fires, no gloom and doom. Just comfort food, baby.
I hear you. Good to see you.
You too.
Tell Andy I said hey.
Absolutely.
More with this after this.
The winter months, it's important to stay hydrated when the weather is cold. But where you get that water from makes a difference. Here's a startling fact. More than 780 million people around the world lack access to safe drinking water. That's 2.5 times the population of the United States. More than half of all Americans drink bottled water, and yet almost every household has access to clean, safe drinking water from the tap. Over the past 20 years, effective marketing campaigns have convinced us that we need to have water in a plastic bottle that appears to have come from some exotic source in the Alps. Truth is, most tap water is as safe as the stuff you pay $2 for at the store. We put 22 billion plastic bottles into landfills each year. Such is the power of marketing. Getting people to buy what they already have on tap for almost nothing. I'm Bill Curtis, and Earth Matters.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, Chicago media personality, John St. Augustine.
Back at it right here on WCPT, coming into the home stretch. Patty Vasquez is going to be joined by Community Acupuncture Clinic Director Jason Bussell and his daughter Ava, and editorial cartoonist Scott Stantis. Don't miss that. The ever-amazing and ever-effervescent Scott Stantis. Plus, Patty will have a $25 gift card for Fry the Coop to give away, driving it home right after this show, weekdays from 5 to 7 p.m. on WCPT 820. Did you hear in the news, were you paying attention, when the number one goal for people in 2025 is to pay down their debt? Did you hear Julie Murphy talking about how you're going to do that, pay down your debt? You got to get behind it, get underneath it, get in front of it. Forgive your spending habits in the past, whatever they might be, and come up with a strategy to figure these things out as opposed to being consumed by it. And I didn't plan on putting that stuff in the news, but hey, that's where it's at, and I could not ignore that. So there you go. Coming up in a few minutes, we're still working to get Doug Farr on the show. He is the founder and principal of the Climate Action Museum here in Chicago. And just from my own experience, and Jennifer was in here a few minutes ago talking as well, we did a tag team event for Earth Matters at the Climate Action Museum, and it was a really interesting thing. The museum is it's kind of like a life-altering climate awareness awakening kind of deal. Once you walk in there, didn't even know it was there. And it's the 300 South Riverside Plaza, right along next to the river, which is the perfect place for it because that river, there's so much history with the Chicago River. You've never looked it up. You really should spend some time with it. The Riverwalk is there. It's fantastic and fascinating as well. And I believe it's one of the only major rivers in the country that they were able to reverse the flow. And the reason they reversed the flow is because cholera and all kind of nasty stuff were backing up because it used to run into the lake and just stop and back up. So it took about 8 years for them to dig the trenches needed to send it towards St. Louis. I don't think St. Louis has ever forgiven us for that. But it was just a real feat of engineering back before all this technology they have today. And so in all of that, working around the corners of how we work with climate change now and how this actually is something we're going to have to deal with, whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, it's here. And I think that's the big aha for me. The big aha is that it's whether you like it or not, believe it or not, the key is not those two things, is do you understand it? And do you understand how it plays out in your life and other parts of the country? So many municipalities have already jumped on board with a climate change action steps that they're taking. The Pentagon's one of them. Places around the country that are on the oceans and the seaports and stuff like that, they're having to deal with this stuff. There are places in the world that it's already become a major problem. We just don't live in those places. We're very, very fortunate by choice or by chance to live in Chicago, which is surrounded by the Great Lakes. And of course, that's one of the largest, if not the largest source of fresh water in the world. So a lot of the stuff we're dealing with, maybe down the road, but even here in Chicago, we have to learn more about it. Doug Farr is the founder and the principal of the Climate Action Museum. We have him on the phone. Doug, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, John. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Wonderful. Happy holidays to you and your listeners.
Thank you so much.
Great to talk to you.
Yeah. So Jennifer Weigel was just in here, and Jen and I did a tag team event at the Climate Action Museum called Earth Matters a couple months ago. Both of us just taken with the place, the layout, the design. Of course, that's kind of your influence there for sure. But so much of what was there was interactive and connective. And so before we move into some of the deeper issues of the climate change stuff, can you kind of just tell folks here in Chicago and online listening around the world where the impetus for the museum came from and what the mission is?
Sure, you bet. Thanks, John. So I'm part of a group of about 30 that started the Climate Action Museum last year, and last June 21st. And we created it because we realized that everyone's thinking about climate, everyone's concerned about it, and a lot of people are confused about what to do. And they're also anxious, and there's no reason to be anxious. So we created the museum as a place to foster conversations about climate action. And we encourage folks to come with friends and family, their book group, their church, their mosque, their temple, whatever. Bring a group, and you will come in feeling one way, and you will leave feeling much better.
So one of my favorite parts was walking through the whale. I just was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Tell me about that.
Well, there you go. So much of climate can be doom and gloom, and we don't believe in that at the Climate Action Museum. We are optimists. We're focused on what you can do to make a difference. And so after an exhibit that has a lot of technical content and it's sort of serious, we thought it was important to offer something that was a little more lighthearted and spiritual. And so you're right. We have a whale. It has a light show inside it. It has a sound track inside it, and has little philosophical quotes. So as people walk through it and read about what the Greek philosophers thought, what Sojourner Truth had to say, all these kinds of things to inspire climate action. Glad you liked it.
So if I'm hearing you right, one of the best parts of what you just said, it's all great, but you're right. So much of it is doom and gloom. The ice caps are melting and the polar bears are getting skinny, and these are all things that are actually happening. But you see the museum's role more as a way to foster ideas and bring out innovations in people that may not have them prior to going in, and then thus creating some action that they can take.
Absolutely. So what we don't need is more kind of worrying and hand-rubbing and ignoring the topic. And so what I would say is I invite folks to consider adopting one New Year's resolution, because we're at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. And that would be the New Year's resolution would be to come to the Climate Museum and to take a visit. And if you get there, what you'll find is there's exhibits on where you live, how you get around, the buildings we all own, the food we eat, things like that are everyday decisions we all make. And there are choices out there that are good for the climate.
Yeah. One of the things that was so impressive is the structure of the place. And it took a little figuring out where this is at, because it's really the only one of its kind in the country, I believe, is an action museum. There are climate museums, but it's the only one deemed as an action museum. Is that correct?
It's the only one in the world, John, that's an action museum. So we believe it's one of only 8 climate museums in the world, and 7 of them are about climate. And sometimes that means it's cold in the mountains, and sometimes it means air is thinner in the higher altitude. But we're really focused uniquely on climate action. There is another climate museum in New York City. We're proud to know that they're there. Mm-hmm. But we've taken a different tack. We went to the New York one and said, thank you for your contribution. what you can do. Dem der does, get her done.
Yeah.
Action. So that's what I would encourage folks to come and check it out.
Fantastic. Listen, we're having a little dicey time with the transmission lines, but I just want to make sure we got a couple minutes in together. So if people want to find you and go to the museum, how do they do it?
A couple things. Go to our website, climateactionmuseum.org. And then I want to invite your listeners, specifically Saturday, January 18th, we're going to have an open house from 10 to 2 at the Climate Action Museum, 300 South Riverside Plaza. We're open 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, free and open to the public, Monday through Friday, 10 to 6, Saturday, 10 to 2. Sorry about the connection, John, but I hope we had a good conversation.
No worry about it. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. We'll be back with more right after this.
For most of us, a simple flip of the faucet is sufficient, but deep underground, it's a very different story. If you have ever had the water in your home shut off for any reason, repairs, what have you, you realize pretty quickly how much we take what comes out of that sink for granted. Now imagine living in an area where you rely on a well for all your water needs, from bathing to drinking, and that well has gone dry. Much of the world relies on groundwater for survival, and in many places around the globe, including right here in the United States, so much groundwater has been pumped out that the aquifers that keep them supplied simply cannot be replenished. In a day and age where bottled water costs as much as a gallon of gas, it's not hard to figure out that as climate change increases and the groundwater decreases, that water is fast becoming more precious than oil in many parts of the world. So don't be surprised if one day H2O is a symbol on the stock exchange. I'm John St. Augustine for Earth Matters.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, Chicago media personality, John St. Augustine.
You know, when I did that to Earth Matters about the groundwater and all the water in general, by the way, not just, we don't get any new water, folks. Here's the wake-up call. The water we have today is the same water that was around when the dinosaurs ruled the planet. And if you're someone who thinks that the Flintstones is a documentary, I can't help you. But what I can tell you is Patty's coming up just after the 5 o'clock news, driving it home. And tomorrow morning, Richard Chu is on from 6 to 8 a.m. Tomorrow in this slot, Turi Ryder's going to be in for Joan. And then after New Year's Day, Best of Joan episode, Turi will be back on Thursday, and Eric Zorn's filling on Friday. And Joan returns Monday, January 6th, live, local, and progressive from 2 to 5, right here on WCPT. I got just enough time to squeeze this in. I was actually doing show prep, go figure, for this time out here on CPT, doing the live stuff. And one of the other big challenges around this time of year for people, I think, is grief. And I can tell you from personal experience, you know, my folks have been gone a long time, but there isn't a holiday that goes by that I don't wish they were here one more time. And I think a lot of people go through this stuff, and we are basically a grief illiterate society. And one of the podcasts that I produce is with a young woman named Mandy Jankus, and she is a grief counselor, a grief teacher. She teaches a college course. At some point, she'll probably be an author. I'm just proud to be able to do this work to help her get her voice out. And so she couldn't join us today. Matter of fact, I think it's her birthday. She's probably busy doing other things. But what I can do is drop the needle on this audio piece that is pre-recorded. I thought it was important to fit this in. So here we go with that. Paul, if you would, please. Mandy, thanks so much for taking the time virtually to be with me right here on WCPT. And in full disclosure, I produce your podcast, which is the Kindred and Brave Project, and it's just a fantastic opportunity for me to actually not only help you get where you're going and help spread the word, so to speak, but also to learn so much from you. And the truth is, after every show I produce for you and engineer it and edit it down, I'm always having a takeaway. And I think the biggest one for me was that you made the statement that we are a grief illiterate society. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, John. If you think about what the definition of illiterate means, it's kind of unable to express or understand. And I think when we imagine ourselves as a grief illiterate society, it's that we're unable to understand it because we don't even know how to say it. We don't know how to use the word. It's almost like the word is tucked away and we hide it. And because of that, and because grief is human and happens every day, it, I think, has had this ripple effect, this negative ripple effect that we are going through what is often the hardest, most vulnerable time in our lives with no understanding and feeling really isolated.
Yeah. I see people who go through things and you're not sure if they're going through it, if they're sticking to it. And the thing that has impressed me most with your work is that you're able to take the death of your mom and transform that while still wearing the authenticity of that loss on one sleeve and the other sleeve to be this counselor and explain these things. But I don't think you'd be as effective as you are without losing her. Is that accurate?
It's completely accurate. And it's the bitter sweetness of, I think, really listening to the signs and the things that come to us. I never thought that I would be on a news program talking about grief or writing about grief or going to a conference and speaking about grief to educators. These things now feel like a dream, but you're absolutely right. And I don't think that I would have had this understanding or this yearning to empower others to understand and connect about it if she were still here. So the person who I always want to share these takeaways with the most, I have to find new ways to do that because it is my mom and she has given me this work.
When I hear you say that, and I've heard you say it over and over again during the past year that we worked together, it's like honoring the loss as opposed to the loss swallowing us up. And that happens for so many people because we're not taught. And I don't remember taking a grief class ever. There's no such thing. I'll let you teach them. But when I was in school back in 19, none of your business what year it was, there was no such thing. Somebody passed away. You went to the wake. A lot of people got upset, and that was the end of it. And then you had lunch.
Yeah.
That's kind of it. So how have things changed, do you think, over time, or have they changed for better or for worse when it comes to dealing with grief?
Well, number one, I'm working on it. I hope someday there will be a grief class starting in, elementary schools.
Yeah.
I think that they have changed. There is a slow change, John, and I think it's because quite a few years back, there really became an emphasis on this idea of social emotional learning, and it was a buzzword for a while. But the reality is we do understand now that the emotional piece in that buzzword is actually the work and important. And if we look at grief as an emotion, a complex one, because it's also an experience, I think that we are starting to acknowledge that we as humans experience emotions on a spectrum, and we all experience all of them. I can also say that we're really starting to see the impacts of some of these tragedies that are happening in schools, right? The Sandy Hook children, the survivors are graduating. They voted. And we're now listening to stories of survivors and understanding what going through such a tragic experience has been like. And I think folks are waking up to notice that we have to feel it to heal it.
Yeah. It comes to mind many, many years ago in 2002, I believe it was. I was in the air in Michigan, and it was a really terrible, snowy, wintry night. And two young people were killed in an auto accident, 16 and 17 years old. I wrote about them in my first book called Love Lights the Way. It's the last chapter in that book. Chelsea Hewitt was 16 and Tim Watchko, her boyfriend, 17. And Chelsea was going to sing the national anthem at the local high school, and they were killed in a logging truck accident. Chelsea died at the scene. Tim survived a couple days. He was able to donate, I don't know how many organs to save other people's lives. So, but out of that, I was on the air, what I thought would be, maybe just talk about this for about an hour. And 6 hours later, people were still calling in. But while it had gone from the immediate grief of these two young people dying, everybody who's ever had a loss seemed that they wanted to chime in and talk about someone that in their life that they had lost. And it was almost like, a can opener popped open these memories for people. I'll never forget this man who called in who was just distraught about hearing this. And he went on to tell about his son who was killed by a drunk driver. And we let him talk, obviously, but you could tell he had not talked about this for years. And so is this this willingness, I mean, to express this. You talk about on your website about grief is inevitable, but going through it alone is not. That a community can form sometimes around us if we allow for that.
Yeah. I think it's such an impactful way to, share our stories, and to think about going in a group can be a little bit daunting. But these organic ways that you share an experience and in a way that gives somebody the opportunity to say, me too, allows them to be seen, allows them to share their own stories. And when we do that, so we're being seen and we're sharing, I think what happens is the story really opens up. Like you said, it's almost like this can that becomes unstuck, and we learn more about the different elements. Grief is not a process, so to speak, right? We can't check off certain pieces of it. But I would be willing to argue that when people share like that, they're also seeing the ways in which their grief showed them anger, their grief showed them regret, their grief showed them despair, and acknowledging the emotional states that we felt, I think, is what helps us to heal.
It occurs to me that it's been said, and I'm not exactly sure, you'd probably know this far better than I would, that this time of year, the holidays, from like Thanksgiving all the way through the New Year's Eve, which is coming up, and all that goes into all that, is a very compact time for people, depending on how you live your life. And for some people, it really doesn't matter. But for a lot of people, there's loss felt at this time of the year greater than other times of the year. I think it's like everybody's shoved together, and the holidays bring out all the emotion, and whether it was good or bad for you, remains to be seen. But there is something to be said about empty tables at chairs that used to have people you cared about, or you're going to an event that reminds you of someone who's no longer here. And it can be in other ways. It can not just be death, but, people who've been divorced or estranged from their family. There's a lot of ways that grief shows up. So is there any... there's no quick fixes to any of this stuff. I've learned that from you. The only way to go through it is to go through it. But what do you say to people when they bring this up, that this time of year specifically is so very difficult for them?
Yeah. First, thank you. Let's talk about it, because there is such a societal pressure. It's all over the branding for Christmas, especially in U.S. American culture. Like, everything is merry and bright, and the reality is it's not. And so once we allow people to feel their feelings, and we don't expect them to be merry and bright for 2.5 full months, I think that's the first societal change that we can make. Let people show up how they are, who they are. Their grief doesn't leave them just because it's Christmas Day. It's like putting Christmas lights on a big wound. It's still there. So let them show up with their grief and get comfortable practicing how you talk about it. I think you hit on some of the great different ways that grief shows up. Obviously, when we see somebody or know somebody is physically missing, right? We've lost them from the earth. That feels obvious and huge. But when we look at relationships that are no longer there or strong, or somebody is still your cousin or your aunt, but you're no longer speaking, we sometimes, because people have left or moved, we lose traditions. So just the changing of a tradition feels difficult. It's something you've gone 30, 40 years doing, and it's now not the same. So again, accepting that piece of the puzzle or the pie, so to speak. And then just really, I think the more we can be okay and practicing being in the messy middle, and just being able to say, what's heavy today? What are you feeling? What does it feel like being year 5 without your mom here? What's your favorite memory with your mom on Christmas? And just, it goes back to what you just said. I think when we are able to hold space and let somebody answer those questions for us, we give them permission to feel their feelings, and we give them permission to heal.
You know, when I was a kid, you have to get a permission slip for every frickin' thing, you know. So what you're basically saying is permission granted. So I'm granting permission as well. If people want to find you on the web, and I know you have a free kind of a free consult to do this stuff. How do they find you? What's the best way to do that? Yeah,
I'm on Instagram at Kindred Coaching. I'm kindredandbrave.com online. My coaching practice is called Kindred Coaching. You can hear the podcast on Apple or anywhere where you listen to podcasts at the Kindred and Brave Project.
Thank you. The world is a much better place. And my world, quite frankly, is a better place because of the work that you do. So thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
So that's what happens when you have a little bit of behind-the-scenes audio going. And I've just worked with this person for about a year now, and I was just so impressed with what she does, because grief is the equal opportunity employer or destroyer. I don't care how much money you have or don't have, how you vote, don't vote, where you live. Doesn't matter. At some point, everybody's going to go through loss, and how that loss affects you or not, I think goes down the line a long way to how you're going to determine how you live your life without somebody who's been a part of it. So, you know, everybody that came to the show today, the thread that runs through all of them is they're authentic. From Dr. Moran running Schurz, the best way that she knows how, coming to this country as an immigrant who didn't speak English, to having more degrees than a thermometer, to Dawn, who talked about the AI stuff. She does this because it's important and it's coming and no one else is talking about it, to Julie Murphy talking about the emotion behind money. It is the thing that you need to grab onto. And of course, you know, my gal pal, Jennifer Weigel, in here, always authentic. You should hear her off the air. It's really, really interesting. And then, of course, talking about the Climate Action Museum with Doug Farr briefly, these are all people who bring something authentic to the table. The world, in my opinion, observation, experience is starving to death for authenticity. Enough of the you-know-what. Let's get down to the real deal. So I appreciate you spending time with me today. Remember, the headlines are not as important as the lifelines. And what's going on in the White House is important, but not as important as what's going on in your house. Until next time, be well, safe travels, keep the faith.